Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I would like to welcome you all to our first keynote speaker, Professor Mohammed Slim Alwini. He's going to talk about the role of non-terrestrial networks in connecting the remaining 3 billion unconnected. Professor Alwini, he's an Khwarizmi Distinguished Professor in the Electrical and Computer Engineering at KAUST. He joined KAUST in 2009 as a founding faculty. He now holds the UNESCO Chair in Education to connect the unconnected and leads activities at the Communication Theory Lab. His general research interests include design and performance analysis of diversity combining techniques, MIMO communication systems, optical wireless communication systems, cognitive radio systems, again communication systems and network, wireless communication systems and networks in extreme environments, and integrated ground airborne space networks. He's currently particularly interested in addressing the technical challenges associated with the uneven distribution, access to, and use of information and communication technologies in rural and low-income, disaster and or hard-to-reach areas. Without further ado, let's welcome our first keynote speaker, Professor Alwini.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the nice introduction. It's always a pleasure to be back here, to meet old friends and make new friends at KFUPM. I would like, of course, to thank Professor Ali Sheikhi, Professor Ali Muqaybel, and Professor Daniel Da Costa for inviting me to this NextG Summit and for giving me this opportunity to share with you some of our ongoing work on connecting the unconnected at KAUST. So, as you know, and this is why we are having this summit, we are really at a time where basically 6G is being kind of defined in a way, as you know, in few months from now, in March 2025 in Korea, we'll have more clarity on kind of basically how 6G will shape up. But what is clear is that, of course, 6G, like all previous generation of wireless communication system, will keep pushing the envelope in the sense that it will keep increasing the data rates that we would like to send over our wireless channels. It will keep increasing the density of connected devices, and will keep reducing the latency of wireless communication systems. That aspect has been there in all previous generation and will continue to happen to meet the increasing demand and requirement from wireless networks. But one other important aspect that 6G is going to start addressing, an aspect that has been more or less neglected in previous generation of wireless communication network, is to try to address the so-called connectivity or digital divide. We still live in a world where about 1/3 of our population is unconnected or underconnected. We are talking about nearly 3 billion people. There are many reasons behind this digital divide. We'll be focusing more on the technical aspect here, but 6G as a part of its vision will have ubiquitous connectivity as one goal to achieve, and one way to kind of check that is hopefully within, let's say, 1 decade, we'll have much less unconnected people worldwide. Now, just to kind of, let's say, summarize some of the important aspects that at least we hope 6G will take care of, is these aspects that are in a way all related to the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. I'll be focusing here more on digital inclusion and or resilience, and in my mind there is some kind of connection or important relation between these two important targets. And when you look at 6G from this perspective, hopefully we can see that 6G, in contrast to the previous generation of wireless communication systems, will be the first generation that will be not solely, let's say, driven by profit and finance perspective, which are important for business sustainability, but also will be driven by these other important SDGs, which includes, inclusiveness and resilience. So when we talk about connected and unconnected, probably the first thing that comes to your mind is developing countries in Africa, maybe in East Asia, South Asia, Latin America. Maybe also you may think about rural areas in developed countries, and that's true. This is the target unconnected population that hopefully these emerging technologies are going to help and make them connected. But we are also addressing many other important sectors. First of all, of course, those of us who are living in a very well-connected environment, we tend to forget that this connectivity can be lost overnight because of natural disasters. And in a way, we'll have to deal with connecting the unconnected type of problem overnight, trying to connect thousands, if not tens of thousands of people. So we are also addressing this aspect. Exploration, sending scientists in Antarctica or in the Amazon, and having this requirement of, let's say, trying to have video streaming from these scientists is a connected and unconnected type of problem. Military mission, of course, they tend to operate in typically unconnected environment. Also, another important aspect that we would like always to emphasize, when we talk about connected and unconnected, of course, we are talking primarily about connecting the unconnected people, but we also talk about connecting unconnected device machine. We do not want to kind of restrict our IoT type of paradigm to smart buildings and smart cities. We want it to be much more global than that and touch smart rural areas, smart basically hamlets, smart villages, in order to move from this, again, in a way, narrow concept of smart city to something broader that include smart living and have impactful, hopefully, application in the context of, let's say, smart agriculture, smart fishing, and so on. Another important aspect is offloading. Even in kind of urban environment that are well connected, you cannot always predict kind of events that have a surge of capacity needs, and we end up having people unconnected because of not enough capacity. But as you will see, using non-terrestrial network, there is a room to basically help this event on a temporary basis and bring capacity on demand where needed for offloading purposes in order to always meet requirement. And finally, when we talk also about connected and unconnected and non-terrestrial network, as we'll see, that's one of the kind of key technology to bring connectivity in a global fashion, will help also a new transportation system, in particular, the so-called three-dimensional network that we will envision in the future, networks that are going to serve not only ground users, but users operating in the air. We are talking about flying taxis, eVTOLs, transporting people and merchandise to kind of bypass, let's say, congested environment or to have last mile type of connectivity with transportation systems. And finally, of course, all kind of maritime communication. When you are in the middle of the sea, yacht, boats, etc., you would like to benefit from connectivity everywhere. So this is just to re-emphasize that, yes, we are talking about rural areas. Yes, we are talking about developing countries. Yes, we are talking about these 3 billion people who are still unconnected and that need connectivity. But actually, we are also addressing many other important sectors when we develop technology in this particular domain. So what is one of the main problems that we have to address? It's a slide that I always like to start with. Basically, it's a slide that kind of capture the quality of experience. You can measure it in any way you like, data rate, latency, bit rate, just a good quality of experience as function of the cost per user when we are focusing on low population density areas. So we all know that with optical fiber cables, you can connect very well urban environment, but it does not make much business sense to dig and lay hundreds, if not thousands of kilometers of optical fiber cable to reach these kind of remote, hard to reach, sparsely populated, often low income areas. So that's why optical fiber gives you a good quality, but it's not cost effective. And that's why mobile network operators tend not to invest in these rural areas, because just there is no return on investment. Classical satellite, on the other side, satellite have been developed for TV broadcasting, of course, are very successful for one-way broadcasting, but they are still quite expensive for two-way internet browsing. So bottom line, what we are trying to target here is the upper left corner, what we can call the global connectivity holy grail, which is a very good quality of experience, but still at a low cost per user, even in these sparsely populated areas. In order to kind of achieve this beautiful vision that Tesla had 1 century ago, if you read basically Tesla basically statement in an interview in a magazine at that time, he was really thinking in a beyond 5G terms, talking about, you know, global connectivity anywhere on land and sea with a very small device. It's amazing the nice vision that Tesla had already 100 years ago. Now, how can we achieve that? So the very first basic principle is when you go into this rural environment, obviously you need to design your network in a completely opposite way we do it in urban, highly densely populated environment, where we densify, where we go to small cell. In contrast, when you have this rural area with very few people living per kilometer square, you want to create these macro cells. How can you achieve big coverage with a single base station? You need to gain in altitude. One way to do that in a very simple fashion is to recycle the TV tower. TV towers are typically strategically located in countries on the top of hills and mountains. So if you attach to them base station, if you use the lower part of the spectrum, you can create these base station of tens of kilometers. So just as a way to kind of validate this very basic concept, and by the way, this is not our own, it has been a concept that has been discussed in this community for a few years. So basically, we took as an example a province in Ethiopia, a country that suffered quite a bit from a digital divide. This is a study that was led by Dr. Ammar Al-Falu, former postdoc in my group. And the idea was to kind of look at density population in this province and the quality of the coverage. So you see in blue, high, basically dense population, green, medium density population, yellow, very low density population. In this particular region, they have 2 base stations in red, and with that, only 5% of people are connected. Now, you can go to the ITU, and we have here colleagues from CST, they know that very well. You can go to the ITU tables, and you can find the location of the TV towers. It happens that there is 3 TV towers in this particular region, and basically, if you attach to them base station and use kind of basic massive MIMO type of technology, you can go from 5% to roughly 15% coverage. Actually, if you decide to move slightly this TV tower in order to match distribution of density population on the ground, you can connect up to 20%. So that's a very simple way to bring connectivity to this region from 5 to 20%. Obviously, you're not solving the problem fully, but it's kind of without having to use satellite or maybe sophisticated solutions, you can just use TV towers that are there at good location to basically bring better connectivity to some particular regions. But obviously, if you want to go towards true global connectivity and gain bigger coverage, you need to start attaching base station to area or space platforms. So obviously, all of you probably are aware of the space race that we are basically seeing on a daily basis in the news. Every single I would say, or the big power here in the world are trying to kind of develop and launch their own mega constellations. As you know, of course, satellite communication is a mature field. We start with the early generation of geo satellite that's still very active. We have still Viasat 1, 2, 3. These are very high throughput satellites that are very actually useful even in today's context, although they come with a certain latency. But where we are seeing kind of a strong emergence is all of these mega constellation. I'm talking here about the Starlink, OneWeb, the upcoming Kuiper that is going to be basically launched by Amazon very soon. The Chinese have their own G60 and GW constellation. So truly, it's a race, and we are soon, and already we have thousands, and soon we'll have tens of thousands of satellites covering the globe to bring this global connectivity. Now, what is less known is that there is another paradigm that, in my view, and few of us in the community feel is strongly about, is anywhere in between. And why do we need to look at other solutions beyond satellites? The idea is articulated in this paper led by one of my former PhD students, Ruibu Wang, and co-supervised with Dr. Mustafa Kishk, who's now in Ireland and used to be in my group. So the idea is we live in a world where the density of population is not uniform. So while we do need to have basic cellular communication coming from mast and tower in densely urban environment, and we do need, on the other extreme, to use satellite for very sparsely populated kind of regions, like deep rural or maritime. Anywhere in between, actually, we may want to use other kind of aerial base stations. For instance, one particular study that we did in this paper, as a toy example, we have different layers here. And again, it's a toy example. We are just using a few hundred meters as a way to kind of explain the paradigm. So we are choosing here to basically connect some users that follow an exponential decrease using stochastic geometry-based framework, of course. These are kind of a very good way to kind of analyze these kind of problems. So we have a decreasing dense population on the ground because you have more users near downtown, less users as you move away from downtown, and we have different tiers. So we may choose to put, let's say, drone in this case at a fixed tier or at different tiers. So the idea here is what we are showing in this paper. So this is the kind of density of user decreasing exponentially. We assume that the drone are going also to follow a decreasing density of deployment to follow what's happening on the ground. And just to make a long story short, if you look at the results, so you see here the coverage probability as far as the distance between the typical user and the origin, which is like basically how far is the user from the downtown. So obviously the bottom green curve is if you completely ignore how density population is evolving on the ground and you put the drones at a fixed tier and at uniform kind of the density of deployment, which is completely, and that doesn't make much sense, you get the worst type of coverage. But then the three other curves, the blue, magenta, sky blue curve, these are if you choose to put the drones with a decreasing density of deployment, but at a fixed tier, at a fixed altitude. You get these three curves, and the higher is the altitude, the better it is. But the upper curve and the best curve is the curve you obtain where not only you try to match the density of population, but also you basically use multiple tier, where basically you use a lower altitude near the downtown and you increase your altitude as you go towards basically the rural area or far from downtown. This is just, again, as a toy example to explain why different altitude with matching of density population on the ground can give you the best possible coverage. So with that, we looked at one particular paradigm that essentially we feel is a good bridge between ground stations on the top of towers and basically a satellite acting as a base station. And this paradigm is known as high altitude platform station. Sometimes the acronym is HAPS, and the HAPS acronym is used also as high altitude pseudo satellites. So these are, as the name indicates, they are pseudo satellites, so they are not on orbit. They are basically flying at an altitude of roughly 20 kilometers. This is known as the stratosphere. They can come in different form, in the form of balloons, in the form of airships, or in the form of basically aircraft like a fixed wing glider or aircraft or drones. So this is an interesting new proposed infrastructure, and I use the word infrastructure to emphasize that this is not only the purpose of this infrastructure is not only to bring connectivity. So in this infographics, we are trying to illustrate some of the user case that hubs infrastructure can enable. So for instance, here we have two hubs. We assume we have, let's say, a disaster in a particular area, a flood. People have been moved to this refugee camp, and there is no connectivity from the ground, so we are bringing connectivity with these green beams from this hubs. On the other hand, this hubs here is covering the rural area, and so there are some IoT devices scattered on the ground. Again, you can bring connectivity to this device in a rural environment from the sky. But a hubs, as part of its payload, can carry a camera that can be used for basically border control. It can carry a LiDAR for environment monitoring. It can carry a radar for, let's say, measuring the level of the water. So this is just to emphasize that this infrastructure there in the stratosphere is acting like a tower at 20-kilometer altitude. Once you have that infrastructure, once assuming it has the right amount of power, you can enable connectivity, but few other important missions that actually typically are done now by satellites. But I always say, HAPS, of course, with the right parameter, can do anything a satellite can do, in a way much better because you are closer to the ground. Now, of course, the underlying assumption that these hubs are interconnected, so they need to be connected, they are acting as relay at the end of the day, so they have to be connected either to the satellite network through typically free space optic links, I will talk more about that down the road, or to the ground through optical feeder links. But it can be also RF backup or RF link only, depending on the nature of the deployment. So this is an infographics to just summarize this HAPS paradigm that we are talking about. Now, I mean, of course, those of us active in this area, we do believe that, again, we are not saying that HAPS is the only solution. We are saying it should be a solution that can be adopted as part of this full non-terrestrial network ecosystem, which includes, of course, satellites. But if you want to emphasize, let's say, few of the advantages of the HAPS, I will highlight two advantages. Number one, and this is just due to the nature of the deployment, which is in the stratosphere at 20-kilometer altitude, which very simply, put, will give you a much better budget link from a LEO satellite at 500 or 600-kilometer orbit. So with this kind of advantage, the very kind of well-known, let's say, or target application that all mega constellations are talking about these days, the so-called direct-to-device, is much easier achieved with a HAPS than with any LEO constellation. And when we talk about direct-to-device, one has to be very careful, because people are already talking about direct-to-device connectivity, but the question, what are we talking about? Are we talking about just texting, voice, or a full broadband connectivity? Are we talking about accommodating a couple of users or a fully loaded network? When we start talking these terms, HAPS clearly has an advantage that a LEO constellation, I'm not saying it's infeasible, but it's much more complex. You will need either this huge antenna, like I'm not sure those of you who follow the news, the AST type of deployment, like a stadium type of antenna. And again, I'm not sure, are we talking broadband connectivity and how many users we can accommodate? Or the more kind of sophisticated, but maybe interesting type of deployment where you will do, let's say, distributed MIMO based on multiple satellites. So all of this can be, of course, a feasible solution from a satellite perspective, but what we are saying, with the HAPS, all this can happen in a more natural and easier fashion because you're just closer from the ground. So that's one advantage I would like always to highlight. The second advantage I would like to highlight, which is more related to sustainability, and you have seen also this concern that many stakeholders are having with this kind of massive deployment of satellite. How are we going to deal with the space debris? How are we going to collect all the satellites down the road? That's a problem that, of course, we need to deal with all these constellations being launched. But at the end of the day, with the HAPS, which is essentially an aircraft, we are talking about a mission. So this aircraft will go there. We'll spend maybe a few weeks, few months. Then it comes back. When it comes back, it can be maintained, it can be upgraded, eventually it can be retired. And we don't have to deal with the space debris problem when we talk about hubs. So these are, again, two of the advantages in my mind that we can highlight and why we should pursue this paradigm, which is still, of course, facing some challenges. We can talk more about it offline because I want to move forward, but definitely from a potential, it has a great potential. So actually, CST, a few years ago, or a couple of years ago, initiated this experimental validation in collaboration with Deutsche Telekom and SPL, SPL being the startup company based in Cambridge, trying to build these hydrogen fuel cell-based hubs. And of course, before talking about this experiment, as you may have heard about 10 years ago with these two pioneer projects led initially by Facebook, now Meta, the Aquila drone, and the Google Loon project. We can talk again about this because people always ask the question why these projects were shut down in a way. But definitely from a validation perspective, it was validated that we can run at that time a 4G network in Peru and in Kenya from these balloons. So they were able to basically connect direct device from these stratospheric base stations. Actually, the experiment that was done in the Red Sea Global area on the west coast of Saudi Arabia, 4 hours north drive of KAUST, our university, was again in this collaboration with Deutsche Telekom, was one of the first 5G trials worldwide. And actually, this was documented in this paper that we published last year. Just one of the experiments that was conducted was basically taking car, moving away from basically a central location and having this car connect to a HAPS type of connection, which is the magenta connection, and the blue connection, which is coming from the ground. And of course, as you move away, at some point, your throughput from the link coming from the ground is going to die because that's how propagation condition works with obstructions and on the ground type of network. But your connection coming from a very good line of sight from the sky maintain a very good throughput, even if you are very far. Actually, some of the colleagues were able to establish connectivity even from maritime environment and from a helicopter in the neighborhood. This is just to demonstrate the ability to use a standard phone to connect directly to a HAPS. Now, what kind of research problems one can do? Again, we strongly believe in this, actually, what is known now as integrated ground-air space, where basically we have these 3 layers collaborating together to connect users. So this problem that was basically published a couple of years ago, we had users on the ground, and the users, depending on the location and depending on the base density of deployment, had the choice to connect either to ground-based station or to HAPS, and the HAPS was assumed to be basically backhauled to the satellite network. And our study has shown that obviously it was a downlink type of connectivity that we are looking at, that the power coming from the HAPS was very important. So for instance, here we looked at this scenario. We have a very crowded or highly congested city, let's say a suburban or village on the other extreme, and in between rural areas. Basically, the users served by terrestrial base station are circled in pink, and many of them have been serviced, but as in the kind of cities and the village. But those who are in rural area, except the one that is served by the HAPS in a red star, everyone else is unconnected. As you increase the power coming from HAPS from -4 dB to 10 dB, you are able to connect more of the rural user. Actually, you are connect pretty much every single rural user with that. But if you connect if you further increase the amount of power coming from your HAPS, you are not only able to connect all the rural user, but you are able to basically provide better links, because here the objective was to basically maximize the sum rate. So the kind of optimization algorithm that we devised here was able to connect not only all the rural user, but also to offer better links or better connectivity option to some of the users in the downtown areas or in the kind of villages or rural communities. And in a way, this is a nice kind of manifestation of one of the basically key aspect that 6G would like to achieve, which is connected and unconnected, but also super connect the connected, providing better connectivity to users who are already being connected to the ground network. And HAPS can offer that, given that it is acting from above and bringing better line of sight condition even for users in urban environment. So this study has been extended to multiple HAPS because like we talk about the constellation of satellite, the vision that we have is that we are not going to be living with a single HAPS, but multiple HAPS or a HAPS fleet or HAPS constellation to cover a large area. And the more HAPS you have, the better you can do. So here with a single HAPS, basically you have this kind of coverage. As you increase the number of HAPS, basically your minimum SANR tends to improve further and further, and this is illustrated in some of our studies here. Zero HAPS, a lot of unconnected user. You bring a green HAPS here, or the kind of spots in green. You start connect more of the user in the rural areas. You bring another HAPS in blue. We have user allocate to green and some user allocate to blue. And then eventually, if you bring a third HAPS, you see you connect all the users to different HAPS in different clusters in order to further improve your total sum rate. Just to go quickly and remain with time, the study I've shown here are all based on classical optimization techniques. Like everyone in the community now, we cannot ignore the power of AI. We were able to develop some AI-based optimization algorithms using, like ensemble deep neural network to optimize in a faster way these complex systems that are using these 3 layers. And I will skip that just to remain on time. What I would like to conclude my talk with is another, I would say, complementary topic, in my view, which is free space optics that can be mixed very well with these emerging non-terrestrial networks. So free space optics is a mature technology. A couple of years ago, we had a very successful collaboration with KFUPM. Professor Salem Zumu, here I think in the room, was one of our collaborators, and we looked at optical wireless communication at that time. It's a concept, again, that is mature, that offers super high data rates, but it has been struggling for terrestrial deployment given its sensitivity to weather conditions, in particular fog, in our context also sometimes sandstorms. Also the kind of very important requirement on pointing that these type of links require made this technology not very well popular or not very much adopted by mobile network operator for ground deployment. However, as soon as we start talking about non-terrestrial network, about space deployment or aerial deployment, there is one important factor that comes into play. This factor is known as SWaP. SWaP stands for size, weight, and power. SWaP. Every time you are trying to lift something to the air or to space, SWaP is a very important constraint. And in this context, free space optics is very competitive. For the same data rate, free space optics is going to be transceiver, much smaller, much lighter, much more compact. Will consume less power, more energy efficient because you are operating at high frequency or small wavelength. And that's why FSO is a big reality of space networks. And this is not anymore science fiction. If you read about, for example, Starlink, now what we are here having is version 2 of Starlink. What's being designed and launched very soon. We are talking maybe a couple of months, if not maybe a couple of weeks. Starlink version 3. Starlink version 3 is already using, like version 2, inter-satellite links that are FSO, but beyond that, they are using in every single satellite a downlink, an uplink, feeder link with the ground that is also FSO based. So what used to be science fiction when I was presenting always this kind of paradigm that is still in my mind kind of a good vision for, and I think we have a problem with the battery of this device. So this vision that I have been presenting over the last few years, and we have been active over the last 5 years on this concept of hybrid, very high throughput. It can be a satellite, it can be a HAPS, doesn't matter, an aerial solution with site diversity is becoming a reality. So what is this vision? This vision is that any aerial kind of solution, satellite, HAPS, will have two sides. One side, which is RF-based, and this RF-based, that the yellow beam that you see, you can turn them on, off, you can move them around, depending when traffic is there. This is basically the side of the HAPS or the satellite to access direct users and basically connect user in different locations on the ground, in the sea, and so on. The HAPS or the satellite, this very high throughput type of relay, and when we say very high throughput, we are talking about terabit per second type of capabilities, has to be, at the end of the day, kind of connected to the ground through feeder links. Currently, if you look at the satellite via sat type of examples, we are using the Ka band. A Ka band is saturated. A lot of people are looking at the Ka band as a way to get more spectrum, in particular IMT. So in the future, Ka band, some of it may go to IMT, some of it may be used actually for user link, which are currently using Ku band. And as such, the idea is to rely on this free space optic link in green, here, to basically connect this aerial platform to the ground. These are the so-called free space optic gateway to aerial type of platform using free space optics. And with that, of course, is very interesting from a research perspective challenges. How can we develop essentially very accurate pointing algorithm operating over hundreds of kilometers or tens of kilometers for HAPS? How can you deal with weather condition? Here we have to deal with basically clouds, which means you need site diversity if you want to guarantee connectivity always. So if you are blocked for some location, you need to be able to pick the signal from a different location and have a network of optical gateway stations that have to be upfront, kind of located in an area where the correlation of cloud basically, let's say, existence is minimum, so that the high probability, there's a high probability if you are blocked somewhere that you are going to be unblocked or like having a line of sight from somewhere else. So all of this is part of the vision that basically this combination of FSO and non-terrestrial network is shaping up. Now, one of the interesting research topic that we kind of pursued over the last few years is the effect of atmospheric turbulence, which is another important disturbance that affect these free space optic links. And when we talk about atmospheric turbulence affecting FSO, what you end up having basically beam spreading, and that make the kind of footprint fuzzy, and beam wandering, which makes the beam at the receiver end dense or contribute to the pointing errors. So we have studied carefully this particular phenomena in the context of ground to air and ground to space type of deployment. And we looked at actually ways to mitigate or minimize the effect of turbulence using adaptive optics. It's a technique that use, in particular, the technique we tried is an array of deformed mirror to basically compensate for this phase kind of disturbance introduced by the atmospheric turbulence. And with that, for example, in the lab of one of my colleagues, we did kind of an illustration of this. You see here a pure beam going through a turbulent environment. If you do adaptive optics post-compensation, you end up with this corrected beam. Sometimes, again, because of the swap constraint, you don't want to do that at the receiver end, at the HAPS or satellite. You want to do it in a pre-distorted fashion on the ground. So you learn how the channel looks like. You pre-distort the beams in a way that once it goes through a turbulent environment, you end up with a nearly pure beam. In any case, what we're able to quantify is how adaptive optics, and we had some paper showing in closed form some of the outage probability with and without adaptive optics in different type of turbulent environment. And some of the lesson we learned is basically, obviously, adaptive optics, when you see these diamond curves, always outperform basically deployment without adaptive optics. That's of course expected, and you get a significant gain thanks to adaptive optics. Another important remark is that uplink is going to be always worse than downlink. And the reason behind that, in contrast to terrestrial deployment, when you look at a vertical deployment, The atmospheric turbulence has a very particular type of profile. It tends to be stronger near the ground, and the strength of the atmospheric turbulence decays as you go up in the atmosphere. And as such, when you talk about an uplink, essentially you have a strong turbulence in the beginning, which means you get affected right away as you transmit your wave from ground to space. Whereas when you deal with the downlink, you start with benign type of turbulence only towards the end. You get affected by strong turbulence. And in a way that an intuitive explanation why the uplink is more affected than the downlink. Of course, when you look at the horizontal link, the black curves that are down here, when you say a horizontal link is a HAPS to HAPS, we are talking here about HAPS type of communications, then basically you are above the atmosphere, you are at 20 kilometer altitude, and as you see, by the time you reach 20 kilometer altitude, the arch probability is nearly zero, which means you have ideal type of performance for HAPS, for FSO connectivity, and that explains why all these Starlink, for instance, satellite are using free space optic to connect satellite among themselves. So of course you can further, let's say, make the connectivity more robust by using ways to mitigate the effect of turbulence. For example, using MIMO techniques. The more laser and full detector use, like here we are comparing a 1-by-1 deployment on the extreme right to basically a 2-by-2 deployment on the extreme left, and you see a big gain out probability, assuming uncorrelated type of channels. If you kind of extend the study accounting for turbulence correlation, you end up with certain degradation. That's like any diversity systems. Correlation will lead to a certain basically degradation in performance, as kind of explained here. The black curve are the curve without the correlation. The slightly worse curve was with a certain correlation between these different receivers. So with that, I would like to conclude and open the floor for question by showing this final vision that we have for future aerial solution to connect the unconnected. So here we look at, of course, this is complementing again the very familiar Starlink mega constellation type of vision. This is a vision at a lower altitude of a HAPS constellation that are there, that are interconnected with free space optics among themselves, with some of these HAPS also backhauled either to satellite network or to the ground through other free space optics. And all of these hubs, at least from a connectivity perspective, are going to be there to connect people and connect device, not only actually for rural areas, but as I mentioned earlier, for offloading type of connectivity in urban environment. In a way, what we are talking about is a stratospheric cellular system, like we see on the ground, basically base station being deployed and user being connected to this base station. In the future, there is a potential of having basically a cellular network, but in the stratosphere, and people connecting to this network from the ground with these microcells. With that, I would like to thank you, and I would like to emphasize that non-terrestrial network basically are here to stay. It's going to be part definitely of 6G and beyond. They are here to not only help deploy network in rural, post-disaster type of situation, but also for airplane, maritime communication, urban offloading, broadband communication scenarios. There is a nice opportunity for free space optic, a technology that struggled to make it in the terrestrial network deployment, to kind of strive with this emergence of non-terrestrial network. And with that, those of us who are active in these two areas, there is a lot of interesting problem to solve in order to reach this important objective of global, reliable, and affordable connectivity for all. With that, I would like to thank you. If you want to follow some of our work, we have a web page, we have a YouTube channel. We have established, actually, as I mentioned earlier, a UNESCO chair focusing on Connect the Unconnected, and we are, let's say, posting some of our result and the result, the paper of the students in this kind of channels. So feel free to follow our, if you're interested by this topic, our results over there. With that, I would like to thank again the organizer for inviting me and for giving me this opportunity to share with you some of our work, and I will be happy to take some questions.
We can have time for one more question. Okay. For one question. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Professor Slim, for the interesting talk. We have time for one question at the moment, but you can always talk to Professor Slim after the session. So do we have a question? Okay.
You mean from the ground? Yeah. So, I mean, security, of course, you can look at it from different perspectives. One may argue that in one way, hubs are, I'll go to the question, but I would like to address the security aspect, or let's say data sovereignty aspect. So actually, hubs have a key advantage from that perspective, because at the end of the day, again, they are operating in your country where gateways are under your full control, and to a certain extent, and your space, depends how you define space, but it's still under, the kind of area of the country. So if you are not a big country like the US or China, it's not clear that you need a mega constellation where the satellites are spending most of their time in other countries with all the risk of leakage, of eavesdropping, jamming, and so on. So at least from a data security perspective, often it's mentioned as an argument for as a superiority or an advantage of hubs compared to satellite network. Now, of course, like now people can talk about how to destroy or to kind of attack hubs, but also satellites. That's kind of part of the whole discussion. I would like also to look at the positive aspect of this, to be honest. Because one way people are arguing about destroying these hubs and satellites is to use laser beams. So use very strong laser beam as a way to basically, you can use that actually also to destroy drones. You can destroy hubs and eventually satellites. That's the negative aspect of this technology. But if I look at the positive aspect of this technology, and this is not science fiction, there are active research on this, how can I use the laser beam not to destroy hubs, but to power hubs? Because one of the challenges of hubs nowadays is how can I generate enough power in the stratosphere, not only to fly, but actually to power all the applications I was talking about, because all these applications don't come for free. A base station, a radar, a LiDAR, a camera, all need power. And the challenge there at 20 kilometers, solar power is not enough. But using laser power beaming to get power, to sustain flying and also serve all my payload is a positive base development for this technology. If you put a little bit more power, you may end up destroying the hubs, but I like to look at the positive aspect because I can use that to power the hubs and make it flying. Thank you, Dr. Ali, for the question. Thank you.
Thank you again, Professor Slim. Our next speaker is Engineer Ayman Maghribi. He's going to talk about spectrum outlook for commercial and innovative use. Engineer Ayman received his bachelor degree from KFUPM, from the Electrical Engineering Department. He received another degree, Master in Telecommunication Engineering from University of Sydney, and Master degree in Engineering Management from KFUPM as well. He's currently the General Manager for Spectrum Assignment with Communication, Space and Technology Commission, CST. He's responsible for all frequency licensing in Saudi Arabia, including spectrum auctions. He was also a wireless communication engineer in charge of planning, designing, and implementation of critical communication networks to support oil and gas applications, public safety communications, and civil applications. Without further ado, let's welcome our next speaker, Engineer Ayman, and the floor is yours.
But there's very little supply that actually can help enable this. So we do spectrum auctions sometimes to give the spectrum to the one who has the most value to it. So auctions are proven to be very successful way globally to give the spectrum to those who value it and have plans to utilize it to the fullest, not just direct assignments. So I'll skip maybe, I've talked about the spectrum management cycle. This was why we need the spectrum roadmap and our previous and spectrum future roadmaps. And this is maybe just some highlights from our 2021-2023 spectrum outlook. We had three main, let's say, focus areas. We had released new services and new and innovative services. We improved access to spectrum, and we've also worked internationally for certain recognitions. From innovation services perspective, we have worked on NTN. We had an NTN auction spectrum that's used for non-terrestrial or MSS mobile satellite services. We did that auction, and we're now seeing services being deployed. We released the 6 gigahertz band for Wi-Fi unlicensed access. We also identified a portion of the 5.9 gigahertz for vehicle-to-everything communication, and we're still monitoring and developing the more needs for this critical application. We've also run a beauty contest for the 450 megahertz band, which the aim really was to have not just, we have our mobile operators having the public networks, but we also have critical industrial networks that need specific needs that are not met by today's networks. So we assigned the 450, which is very, deep coverage. Propagation is very great in this spectrum, and the use cases are very critical. So we licensed a nationwide industrial network to Aramco Digital last year, part of the outlook. We've also improved access to spectrum through new licensing regime called light licensing, which is a soft touch or a light touch approach to licensing. We enable trading to allow licensees to be able to trade. We also allowed easier access to NTN spectrum and space station registration. And from international perspective, CST was awarded the G5 regulator classification. And this was also supported by the Wi-Fi release for the 6 gigahertz spectrum. So this is just a snapshot of what we've done so far. Looking forward, we need to update the spectrum outlook. Why is that? We are working on a new national spectrum strategy. The one we have ends in 2025, so we're working actively to update our national spectrum strategy. We have the World Radio Conference, which is a conference that happens every 4 years to revise the international allocations for spectrum. The last one concluded in 23, so we reflect the results. And we're also working on the next cycle, which is in 27, which has a lot of new services, specifically for satellite and non-terrestrial networks included. And also and the thing about spectrum is it's not just communication. We have industry, we have energy, we have space. All of these applications need spectrum. So we have national sectors that are developing and having national strategies, and we need to accommodate their future planning through our through this outlook. Some applications I'm just going to highlight. These are priority areas. So the first one, as I mentioned, non-terrestrial networks today are converging with terrestrial networks. We are seeing direct-to-device. Sometime in the future, you won't know if you're connecting to a base station on the ground or if you're connecting a base station in space or in even hubs or labs. We're also examining drones beyond visual line of sight connectivity. The future for 6G, fixed wireless application as a service is very critical for the communication and connectivity domain. Private networks is a domain that's increasingly active, and they need dedicated or special needs. And also from another sector, we have advanced air mobilities, air taxis, and all of that. These are all upcoming, and we need to plan for them well. So the cycle for this outlook, we had the inputs, as I mentioned some of them. We also have our CST strategy and national digital strategy. We analyzed what's happening in the world, what's the major topics, what other countries are doing. We found some gaps from today's experience we have, and we worked to identify these areas and ask the public. In September last year, we published a consultation document to see the industry demand, industry needs, and views. Some spectrum there's always competing demand, so we need to see what the market thinks is the best demand, and then we act upon it. And later on, we'll have the final outlook published, hopefully by Q1 this year. In the next slides, I will go through the consultation document, highlight some of the areas or responses that we have received, And hopefully this will shed some light on what we are intending to do in the next cycle. So we have maybe 9 themes covered in this Outlook cycle. Maybe I'll not go through them in details, but as I mentioned, NTN is critical. We need to have more capacity for today's 5G networks and tomorrow's 6G networks, fixed wireless access. We want to foster spectrum sharing. We cannot always have exclusive use for specific applications. We need to push technologies to coexist, to manage them in a more dynamic way. Verticals are included as well, the future of transport, spectrum access for PMSC, which is special events and like microphones and such. Spectrum trading and research and innovation is also a critical theme in our Outlook. I'll maybe just highlight this first, and then we can go back to the specific sectors. Our public consultation, we had more than 70 responses from the industry. Collectively, that's about 600 pages of different views and different thoughts on different spectrum. We also had a dedicated workshop going over these topics. We had more than 250 attendees, over 5 sessions that we have covered some of the major elements. Just briefly, we have had space sector. They provided different feedback on NTN. Communication sector, they use for IMT spectrum, transportation, IoT, also research and innovation. Some of the sectors that we have received from as a high level. And I actually wanted to take the next few slides to showcase or highlight some of the applications or main directions. And of course, this document has been published. It's closed for comments at this stage while we finalize. However, it's already on CSC's webpage. If you're interested, then we can share that maybe with the organizers. So one of the first items we ask for is having more spectrum for 5G and 6G. We are planning in the next cycle to release the 26 gigahertz, the millimeter wave band for hotspot connectivity. We also have the L band in the 1500 megahertz range. It has been identified for 5G for a while, but I think the ecosystem has been struggling a little, and they were trying to see what's the best way to approach this problem through this Outlook. And really, these are some of the options we are considering for each band. So do we do millimeter wave in cities only? Do we have a single infrastructure provider, and then they can sell it or provide it to the operators? Or do we separate the use cases? We go to the level of the technology, etc. For the L band, it's quite different maybe issue. It's about TDD, FDD allocation, or maybe there's other use for this band like drones or satellite. Private networks, as I mentioned, we're enabling access for private networks. Private networks need spectrum in a very specific location, small location. They don't need big deployments or nationwide deployments. So we're seeing what's the best part of spectrum that can enable the heavy applications that we are seeing today. We are investigating the 4 gigahertz part of the C-band with specific parameters to protect incumbent services and also radio altimeters. We're investigating, should it be to the user, should it be to operators or providers and other applications as well. Direct-to-device is something very hot at the moment. We've already seen trials, we've already seen use cases or even deployments today. And there's really different types or approaches to direct-to-device. One approach is to use spectrum that's already allocated for mobile or for satellites. So this is spectrum that's agreed internationally to be used by satellites, which is companies like Viasat and Iridium, they have L-band and S-band. And these are used today in the release 17 for SOS applications. However, there is another push or another approach to this issue is we don't need new spectrum. We already have terrestrial spectrum used by our operators, the T-Mobile is in. Why not reuse that in remote areas where it's not used? And this is approach for some of the other players like AST Space Mobile and Starlink, where they agree with the operators on where to use. And these are two different approaches with different pros and cons. And we're seeing really what's the developments happening, what's the best a way to do so. We also have AFC, automated frequency coordination. And what does that really mean exactly? It's a nice acronym, but it's really reflects our commitment to have dynamic access for spectrum. We have released, the 6 gigahertz for Wi-Fi indoor for unlicensed applications. However, we have existing applications outdoor, like fixed links, like microwave backhauling, like some satellite stations. But these are all applications that are very known, and we would like to extend the Wi-Fi or WLAN connectivity outdoor, so we can also have this experience, seamless experience from indoor to outdoor without affecting these incumbent users. And this is what the AFC does. AFC is a database that reads where these existing users are, and it's already programmed in the Wi-Fi chipsets to tell them, okay, you can use full power in this location, but if you move to another location, you need to reduce the power, or you cannot use the full 6 gigahertz, you can use the first 160. And this is already, it's being trialed and tested in other countries like the US and Canada, and I think it's starting to be deployed, and we are also planning to finalize a lot of these aspects for AFC use in this cycle. Hopefully, maybe we can also have more updates by this year as well. And I think this just reflects to the point that next year is not just about 6G or this typical connectivity we have from cell towers. Connectivity will be converged. It needs to be converged. We don't want to connect Wi-Fi and then we go out, we connect to our network. It all needs to be, at the end of the day, converged connectivity. And this is something that the industry needs to move forward. AFC hopefully is one of the elements that help this convergence. We've also had interesting needs for the 6 gigahertz. This band has been, showcased to have big capacity. However, it has some propagation issues in the past. But we've seen a lot of developments in the standard and the using this band for, I think, part of the IEEE standards for fixed wireless application, and it has shown some interesting results globally. So this is something we're also asking about. What's the best way to use this band? Should it be licensed or lightly licensed, or the technology has reached a level where it does not need interference or it does not need regulator management for this band, and it can be license exempt? These are some of the questions we are asking for the specific band as well. For the transportation sector, which is a sector that also relies on connectivity and has a lot of ambition, we've had interesting discussions on using the future railway communication system, FRMCS, which is replacing some legacy railway connectivity. We've also explored drones, unmanned area system, if they need more spectrum, if they need specific spectrum through satellite or through terrestrial, or maybe going through the national operators to connect their drones. As I mentioned, the vehicle to everything, we enabled a portion of the band, and we're still exploring if there's more demand or if there's other competing V2X flavors that could be considered in this cycle. This is something also we're fully supporting and working with our national regulators like GACA and TGA, the regulators for transportation, regulators for aviation, to see what's on their radar as well. These are some of the topics that we've had clear options or questions. However, we have a lot of things that we still feel it's immature for us to set a direction or propose a direction. However, we want to hear from the stakeholders, from the industry, academia, and so on. And these include some of these topics. 6G and spectrum of 6 gigahertz, we're always open to hear more about what the industry, academia need. Spectrum of 100 gigahertz has been very challenging to use. However, we've seen some advancement or some trials globally, and this is something we are still monitoring and open to more discussions through this outlook cycle. We want to enable more academic research. We are also open to see what needs could be what specific needs for reconfigurable intelligence services could be accommodated through spectrum or licensing. And also Open RAN is another topic that's actively being discussed. We are supporting several trials around the kingdom. If there's more specific demands, we are also open to hear from the industry. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to share with you what Spectrum Outlook has done so far, what we are planning to do. Hopefully this document will be finalized by maybe hopefully Q1 this year, and we can have a very clear roadmap for the next 3 years. And we look forward to hearing more from the industry, from the academia, from the vendors, users, researchers, and all of that, on all of these different topics, which we believe push the next G connectivity paradigm through all the different domains. With that, thank you very much. I would like to thank our host again for having us here today. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Let's thank our speaker, Engineer Ayman. The heart of the Next G Summit is to identify Next G business case and technologies. For that, next up we have a thought-provoking panel discussion chaired by Professor Daniel on the Next G business case. Let's have a short 20-minute coffee break and poster session, and we will be back, inshallah, at 11:30. Thank you all.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Let's continue this morning section with a panel whose title is What is the Next G Business Case? Before inviting the panelists to come to the stage, I would like first you introduce the panelists, and I would like to present one slide to guide the discussions. So I'll be moderating this panel section. And you have 3 panelists, Professor Mohamed Islina Louinin from KAUST. He's a distinguished professor, and also he holds a position, UNESCO Chair in Education Connected and Connecting. I would like to invite Professor Zlaumir Tankzaki. He is a professor at the Technical University at Berlin, and also the head of the Wireless Communications Network Department at Fraunhofer HHI in Germany. And I also would like to invite Dr. Zlaumir Pietrzycki, who is the CEO and founder of IS Wireless. So as the name, the panel says, what is the next business case, which will be strongly related to this technology revolution. Actually, there is no technology without business model. We can propose new ideas, we can propose new solutions, but if you're not able to monetize, to make it affordable, they are useless, right? And this slide I show in my welcome words, it exemplifies the technology revolution over the decades. Focus on 5G, because it's the most recent one, you are moving towards 6G. So 5G, basically, it was designed on 3 pillars. We have enhanced mobile broadband, ultra-reliable wireless communication, massive machine-type communication. And related to these services, we have 3 main technologies: massive MIMO, ultra-dense networks, and millimeter wave communication. So basically, this was 5G. But after 5 years, what we are observing, 5G is not still fully implemented. If you look for these 3 pillars, we have basically enhanced mobile broadband. There are many reasons for that. One is basically the misconception regarding networks and services. When you talk about network, it's the infrastructure that will enable the services. And the services are the use case, monetizable use case of network. And when you have to launch the services, you first need to have the infrastructure. And the infrastructure is costly. So how to convince operators to invest without services? Because the services, that is, as I mentioned in my opening words, is a kind of egg and chicken situation, right? But this is what happened for 5G. And now we are moving towards 5G, towards 6G. You are in the middle. And what we needed to ask ourselves is, have you learned from the lessons of 5G, or you are following the same path? What you are doing in terms of business model, in terms of use cases. And we have in our ecosystem of dissatisfaction for 5G. We didn't deliver what was promised. And the panel has this main focus to have some thought-provoking questions, and all attendees are welcome to participate of the discussions, and to have such kind of discussions in terms of the roadmap. So you can see in the right part a figure showing the usage scenarios for 6G. So we don't have still the network, but we already provided the use case, right? So you are expanding the triangle, sorry, in an hexagon with new services. But what is the guarantee? It will be successfully delivered, commercialized in 5 years. This is one point. So I would like to start this panel by making this question in terms of the roadmap and the actions you are taking towards 6G. So you are proceeding in a different way as was did in 5G, or you are taking actions which will make a 6G not only a promise, will be really a reality in 5 years, 7 years later. So I'd like to ask the panelists, so feel free to start in, I know it's not easy, but this is the main, I would say, the purpose of this panel, to have this kind of thought-provoking questions and see what is the opinion and how we can deal with such kind of technology revolution. Especially now we are facing much more challenges. The problems now are different from the past. We have more strict requirements. And another question that I would like to make after that one, but I anticipate is, between the generations, you have the 10 years. So it is a standard 10 years gap. Does it make sense we continue with this 10 years gap? It's a feasible time frame, or it's better, instead of talking about Gs, we talk about first let's deliver what was promised to start to think about some new futuristic use case. So, Professor Alwini, please.
Yes, thank you. So, yeah, thank you, Daniel, for this very nice introduction. So I think you introduced the panel very well. If I understand well what you said, is that when you look at 5G, let's not call it a failure, but maybe a partial success, right? In the sense that 5G was advertised as this very famous user scenario, EMBB, machine type communication, and let's say ultra low latency, ultra reliability communication. Part of this 3-user scenario EMBB made it, and it's become part of basically real 5G deployment. The two other use scenario, like ultra low latency and ultra high or high reliability, basically, technically they were achieved. There was good research, there was good prototype, but I don't think, from my understanding, I'm not in industry, from my colleague in industry and in the kind of mobile network operator, they are not seeing big success of deployment of these two user scenario. So there is a saying, I mean, it's kind of, let's say, more anecdotic, but it's kind of observed, that when you look at generation of wireless communication system, that we have seen always success in the even generation. Like 2G was a big success because it fulfilled the vision of mobile connectivity with phone. 4G was also a big success in the sense it allowed broadband connectivity. Maybe actually we have to wait until 6G is fully deployed to fulfill, let's say, the vision that 5G promised. So 5G promised some technical achievements. Some of them were achieved from a technical standpoint, but from a business adoption, from basically deployment, probably it was not as successful as expected because maybe it didn't match exactly the needs currently. But hopefully 6G, as we adapt to, and we can talk more about vertical networks, maybe different mode of running these type of services, may fulfill what 5G promised 10 years ago.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. I think now.
Yeah.
5G, I think that 5G is a great technology, first of all. It's not a failure. I think that what was not good, it was this expectation management. So I think that we promised too much. But I think that in some sense 5G was a revolution because we included new players, stakeholders, right? Vertical industries. So it was not only about connecting humans, but also about connecting machines. And I can remember, the first discussions in Germany with the partners from the vertical industry. We didn't understand each other. They were talking about some use cases. It was just, like verbal description, and we didn't know what they want from us. And we are talking about quality of service and things like this, and they didn't understand us. So I think that and then we developed these visions, tactile internet, 1 millisecond, and so on. And then we learned that this is not so easy, and especially it's also costly, right? I don't like this thing about even and odd stuff, really. I mean, beginning and maturity. First of all, 1G was analog system, right? So 2G was a revolution because this was the first system, digital system. I think 3G was a first IP-based, and it was a failure, but I cannot say that, 4G is some kind of, incremental development of 3G with a completely different waveform, or FDM, and this was a big success. So we have to be careful with such statements. The sequence one is not long enough to talk about patterns. And I don't know whether this will repeat, that odd numbers are bad and even numbers are good. But personally, I don't like, this idea, and it's also dangerous. Network operators invested a lot of money in 5G. Now they expect revenues. We talk about, things like 5G is bad. 6G will fix everything. I think this is not good for the business, from the business point of view.
Yes. So there was an opinion that 5G is partially successful, that it is successful. So I don't have any other choice but to say that it was not successful, and this is what I'm going to say. Because the benchmark is clear. There was this IMT 2020 indication of the requirements, and out of those requirements, it's just the enhanced mobile broadband that has been met. Nothing else. Nothing else. And the enhanced mobile broadband target was met for the only reason of using broader channels in 5G. So, I mean, if you add more channels and if you add more spectrum, of course, the capacities of the networks and throughputs will be higher. So it's not the rocket science. Therefore, I would say that 5G as a general has not delivered. But hey, what we would expect from the markets where 80% of the total market is dominated by just 3 suppliers. The dinosaurs of the technology era, they are there for decades, and their business model has not changed for the decades. So we are in the era like we were with personal computers in the late 80s with Commodore, Atari, ZX Spectrum, for those of you that remember. These beautiful toys were completely incompatible with each other, and the true revolution happened only after the modular computers appeared on the market. And this is the actual change that coincides with 5G, but it's not 5G 3GPP targeted or driven, it is ORAN, Open Radio Access Network driven. On the technology side, you see that the value chain is decomposed into pieces and elements that are taken by the companies specializing in certain areas, but also on the customer side, the typical operator side, that the composition is happening as well. But I stop there.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing the facts. I understand it's not an easy topic for discussion, but it's part of our roadmap. So if you look, again, still in 5G, we didn't have a killer service, actually, like we had in 4G. 4G, you have the smartphone. So smartphone changed completely of our lifestyle. In 5G, still under deployment. Hopefully in the next few years, we have a truly 5G network worldwide. But looking for next G, what is expected to be the killer service, the business case that will bring attention of operators to invest, to have infrastructure, to deliver the envisioned use case.
So I believe, yes, maybe we need to go beyond the model that has been used from 1G to 5G, where basically mobile network operator are selling service to to customers directly. I think we'll see more maybe the so-called vertical networks, where there will be some specialized network for factories, for hospitals, for maybe also farms in a rural environment. And maybe some of these networks will capitalize on some technology that are specific to 5G, or that can be further improved in terms of ultra reliable kind of communication, low latency, if that's kind of the requirement to be expected from certain environment that are not kind of meant to be for massive deployment, but for specific deployment. And that's maybe one way to create revenues from these very specific vertical type of network, including also maybe some location where if you want to use extended and virtual reality, where maybe again low latency and high reliability will be required. So I believe using vertical network that can capitalize on very specific needs can be one different user scenario, let's say, or a business case that we'll see emerge as part of beyond 5G or 6G.
Okay. To be honest, I don't like the discussion about use cases, because if I knew killer use case, I wouldn't say this here, right? I would just probably fund a company and become a millionaire or something like this. So, and this is one thing. So, to be honest, I don't know what would be the killer use case for 6G. And there are many discussions, but maybe we can also learn from history, right? So we have the discussion in connection with every generation. You know, I think 2G, 3G, I started with 3G. We had this discussion, and there was a talk from Nokia, and Nokia pointed out that we were always wrong, right? We anticipated, you know, use cases for every generation, but in the reality, you know, something came up unexpected, and then, you know, the life was different than, you know, anticipated. So I think that maybe later we will talk about this need for new generations. You know, this is no like natural law, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you know 7, 8, and things like this. But I think that there are some technological drivers, right? And this is you know there is a fact: spectrum is scarce and very expensive, and then the traffic. I mean, the amount of data transmitted over wireless channel increases, at least on average, right? So you have two options. Slavomir said additional spectrum, huge fight everywhere about spectrum, or you have to increase spectral efficiency, difficult. This is, you know, what we also promised in the context of 5G, what Slavomir mentioned. But the point is that there is an inherent trade-off between spectral efficiency, latency, energy efficiency, and cost. We cannot promise everything. And this is what we did in the context of 5G. So I think you can say, okay, there's a promise. There's this paper, IMIT paper, and there was a promise, and 5G technology, you know, 5G didn't deliver this, but still 5G is under development for some reasons. So you can say 5G is bad, or you could say also that the document was, you know, I don't know, science fiction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what is the killer application? If I knew, I would found a company. Actually, I found a company, and I'm planning to become a millionaire, but not in the application domain, because the concept of killer application suggests that I think by far we are here the technology guy, that the technology itself is somehow combined with the user experience very much and with the utility that the services can deliver. And I think that it's not correct, because we should leave the areas of specialization for the specialists. Now, for long, we've been thinking about, you know, the next killer application, what would it be? But I think we should give up this sort of thinking. We should look at connectivity as commodity, as electricity supply, as water supply. It's nothing special, I'm sorry to tell. It's nothing special for contemporary human beings, for nowadays human beings. It's so much needed, but it's at the same time so basic. Now, we as specialists should focus on delivery as much efficient, as cheap as possible, delivery of this commodity, and let the others come up with the use cases. It's really difficult to, it would be difficult to come up with use cases that the electricity have driven, like, you know, 50 years before having these applications on the market. So I am really very skeptical in all these talks about VR, about, you know, Google Glass and so on. We know that it's not selling, by the way. We should rather think about having a fair share of revenues, and people will come up. They will bring the solution if they see their business opportunity there.
Okay, thank you very much. And one interesting point, actually, Dr. Zlomi Petrescu, you mentioned your first comment is about Open Run. Right, Open Run as a concept in which we work with virtualized radio access network, using open interface, disaggregated components, and optimization via intelligent controllers. So we have a new concept. From the operator perspective, this will improve the competitiveness. But we always needed to look at the customer side. And the customer side, usually when you offer some new services, it must be affordable or the customer must see some boost in performance, for example. So if you using the concept as Open Run, which kind of performance improvement you can guarantee to the customers?
Oh, this is a very nice question and a tricky one at the same time, because why it is a good one? Because it really touches the essence of novelty. Well, you come up with something new, show us that it brings benefit. That's exactly what we should expect from the novelty. But at the same time, we know that Open Run perception is like the 5G perception. It has under-delivered. That's the general perception of Open Run. By why is that? If you look into the major providers of contemporary Open Run, you will see that their narrative does not differ very much from traditional vendors. They also want to build sites that are using massive MIMO. They also push on operators being the primary customers. They are bringing value, of course, in automation of the network. But this is the old concept of self-organized networks. We know that, of course. Yes. But they are trying to imitate the traditional vendors. And they have entered they have entered into the battle at the battlefield that is prepared for somebody else, and they are losing. That's why the general perception of Open Run is that it has under-delivered. So what is needed is a new wave of Open Run, a wave where by using the natural features of Open Run, which is disaggregation of the functionality, you can improve the efficiency of resources, of usage of resources, and then the cost that you said the operators perceive as the investment, as the investment threshold can fundamentally be lowered, and you can immediately see that this new Open Run to zero can give you substantial savings, not costs, but savings, so you can benefit, you can enable much more business cases. Well, then the thing has changed, is changing. And I think that I do believe that we need to change these paradigms before we start thinking seriously about 6G, because there will be no 6G if the markets will not adopt the solution.
Okay, thank you. Anyone would like to comment?
Maybe because I say fundamentally disagree with Slavomir on this aspect of specialization.
This is the reason we invite you both for the panel.
Okay, so I think that, okay, so what he's saying is the following, that you provide great connectivity, and that there will be people who will take this and on top of this will develop killer applications. So, I mean, this was the idea of 5G, at least, you know, from my perspective at the beginning, you know, in the context of, say, like Industry 4.0, communication for the vertical industry. So we met, we say, what do you need? They said what they need, and then we developed the technology for you. It didn't work out. For several reasons. I mean, this is not my opinion. I mean, 5G ICEA in Germany, I mean, Andreas Müller-Bosch, I mean, he gives talks about this because he said we shouldn't develop technology, communication technology for the vertical industry, but with the vertical industry. So it's mainly about the cost. We say, okay, you can provide great technology, but we forgot the cost, return of invest. And then this is now they are talking about this. Just, you know, if I buy this 5G technology, it must be just, you know, I can go to Ericsson or Huawei, but, you know, they want so much money. I mean, it's not, you know, it's not an option for me. So I think that in the end, I think cost and scarcity of the spectrum will force us to be some kind of specialist. You know, to design customization, to design.
This is my point.
This is your point. Aha, okay. So we converged. And also the whole story about semantic communication, right? I mean, okay, I mean, if, I don't know whether we will talk about this, but we had a nice discussion before the panel
Yes.
on the semantic communication, because in this case, the communication problem is not technical problem. It's you know, you take into account, you know, what you are going to communicate.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to add, but indeed, I think Open Run, let's say, under-delivered, and actually it was hard to compete with the well-established, vendor like the Ericsson, Nokia, Huawei of the world. But I agree that there is still a room for Open Run to succeed in vertical network if it's done right and if it's done in a collaborative mode upfront in order to kind of meet the specific user scenario of particular vertical industry.
Okay, thank you. Regarding the technologies, it's under discussions in our scientific community. We have, I would say, several research topics. One is reconfigurable intelligent surface. We have a semantic. We have a digital twin. So we have several topics which is under discussion. And on the other hand, it's not only in the technology idea. We need to get in some maturity. We need to account for the technology maturity. So if you are working on reconfigurable intelligent surface and through some simulations, through some applied, I would say, experimentations, that to make it commercialize it, is this enough? Since that you need to aggregate in the same context a kind of end-to-end ecosystem with the required software, hardware, and business model. So based on all these technologies we are currently, working on, what do you think about it? Which one will be implemented for 6G? Which will be implemented for 7G? Or it's not feasible? What's the opinion, regarding those technologies we are under discussions, and many sectors claim you'll be part of 6G. Do you think all these usage scenarios will be delivered in next G, for example, integrated sense and communication, and among others, or there are some that it takes actually more time to reach the level of maturity to be successfully, commercialized, implemented?
I can start. So first of all, maybe one way to start answering this question, all of us are basically professors in universities, and I think we should be allowed to kind of do blue sky research. So even if the technology end up not being adopted in the next G, I don't think it's the end of the world, because we should explore, we should try, we should understand the mechanism behind new technologies. And then, of course, some of them will be successful, some of them will never be successful, some of them will be successful in 2 or 3 generations. So in this context, okay, I have been active in reconfigurable surface, in terahertz. When you talked again to more people in the field running like basically networks, it seems that this technology will not be massively deployed in the next G. Like when you talk like millimeter wave itself has not been a great success as part of 5G, only in few hotspots. So I doubt that terahertz will pick it up in few years from now. Now, does it mean that we should not do research terahertz? No, because there will be a time where terahertz will be useful in some other ways. Reconfigurable surface, again, this initial kind of paradigm of painting buildings with a passive reflecting surface, clearly this is not going to happen. And if reflecting surface are going to be used, probably as addition to base station in a multi-mode format, where you can have classical base station acting as a pure transmitter or as reflector if needed for more energy efficiency. But I think non-terrestrial network, on the other hand, this is a technology that is happening as you follow the news and is going to improve because there is this need of ubiquitous connectivity for maritime communication, for airplanes, for people going into rural environment. Is not to basically go to broadband right away, but we are to see gradual increase in delivering connectivity to this unconnected environment. And then also, I think one thing maybe we didn't mention, but AI clearly is gaining momentum on how it's being used at different level of network development, management, maintenance, and clearly AI is a very powerful technology in many sectors, and clearly also in our particular network management sector.
Thank you.
So I think that here we have to differentiate between, say, public mobile networks and private 5G networks, 3GPP, non-3GPP technologies. Okay. So when it comes to public mobile networks, I think that many technologies like maybe RIS, sub-terahertz, I mean, they won't be part of, say, the first wave of 6G. I don't know, maybe they will come later, or maybe, you know, this is something for 7G. 3GPP, I think that 3GPP, they excluded sub-terahertz for the first wave. I don't know what is the state of risk, but if I talk to Ericsson and Huawei, and then they ask what is the business case, right? So, but now we have private 5G networks, and we have non-3GPP. I mean, in private 5G networks, we have, for example, Industry 4.0 and so on. The requirements are completely different for many use cases. So let's take RIS. RIS, I mean, most people, they evaluate RIS in the context of path loss gains. Yeah? I mean, and then there are statements, RIS doesn't make much sense. If you have strong line of sight, forget it, right? But in this case, path loss is like, you know, say average performance metric for best effort traffic. But if you go to Industry 4.0, you are interested in reliability. So it's about 99.999%, right?
Yes.
And then you are interested in latency and maybe also some kind of security, jamming. And then here, I think that RIS can help. Sub-terahertz. We started collaboration, Nokia Charité is the biggest hospital in Germany on sub-terahertz sensing to capture vital parameters of patients and things like this. There is a strong interest. But this can be also non-3GPP technology. So I think before we say that some technologies are dead, there might be some interesting niche markets for some technologies outside of 3GPP.
Yes.
So how to predict the future? So what is 6G? That's the difficult thing. I think that primarily 6G will consist of fulfilling the unfulfilled promises of 5G. And that happened also with previous generations. We know my professional life started around 2G, so I remember very well the expectations that were related to 3G. And I remember the satellite component there and connecting everything with everything, right? It was already at the 3G level at that time, you know, Frames project, UMTS, and so on. So I think it will be fulfilling the unfulfilled promises of 5G, and most of all, it will consist of really further disaggregation of the networks. So that's the next level of Open RAN. And even though this perception, as I said, of Open RAN is that it's quite under-delivered, the future will have more of Open RAN. Now, you have mentioned a lot of interesting techniques like integrated sensing, digital twin before, RIS, AI. I might sound a bit controversial, but to me, these are all like warmed up food from the previous day, really. Integrated sensing doesn't differ much from passive radar. It's been for many years. Digital twin is basically the simulation and modeling of the environment around us. RIS, well, repeaters, that's pretty much very similar concept. AI, I know it's posh, it's hype, but neural networks, genetic algorithms, they've been with us for a long of time, for really a length of time. So I'm not saying they are unimportant, but we should weight these techniques appropriately and allocate our focus where the impact and influence on the actual benefits for us will be the greatest, I think, and they lie in how well we are able to use what we already have without taking the new resources. That's my point.
Okay, thank you. I would like to open the floor for any question. Is there any question from Dennis? Yes, please.
Thank you for the sessions. I'm a clinician, so I noticed that also Salome mentioning the using telecommunication and healthcare in one of the biggest hospitals in Germany. So my question is to you, how do you see the potential now for 6G generations in terms of the communications related to the health infrastructures and from your German experience?
Which infrastructures?
Or
Hospitals. Okay, there's okay, I mean, there's I mean the potential. Okay, so I agree, you know, with the statement that 6G will fix some or will fulfill some promises we made in the context of 5G. I don't know whether all the promises. I don't know whether we need, you know, latencies below 1 millisecond or
not commercially, but
yeah.
on research, sure. But the world is full of great ideas. The issue is how to execute them. That's my point.
So, I mean, from my perspective, I also coordinate a research hub, 6G research hub in Germany, funded with 70 million euros by federal, and the focus is on health and medicine, also mainly in the context of hospitals, because we have the Charité. And there is a huge interest. And there are many interesting use cases in hospitals. So if you ask me, there's a huge potential. And I think that we can use 5G to, say, enable some of these use cases. But for other use cases, you need, you know, new technologies, like, you know, sub-terahertz sensing. I mean, D-band, or even, you know, beyond 200 gigahertz. And then here also collaboration with doctors is necessary to understand the interaction between, you know, electromagnetic waves with, you know, human bodies and things like this. So here I see huge potential, and then also we identify many use cases related to robotics. I mean, in Germany we have problems with, we don't have people, you know, who work in hospitals and so on. And then, you know, the idea is here to use robots, but it's not so easy, you know, to integrate robots in, say, you know, everyday life of hospitals. And also, you need something like collaborative robotics, robots that collaborate, they are coordinated and things like this. And many of these use cases you can enable using 5G, but I think that we need here some, say, new ideas to make it more, say, efficient. I mean, to increase efficiency and especially robustness.
Thank you. My question, second question to Dr. Mohammed, you mentioned that 6G is less harming and to the health compared to the 5G and 4G. On your slides that you mentioned, you said 6G is less harming.
Okay, sorry, yes. I think what I mentioned is, sorry, maybe that slide was taken out of context and it was part of another deck of slides. But the idea I was trying to convey there, those of us who have been again in this business for many decades, every time we move from one generation to the next, often there is this debate that comes into the media about EMF radiation, how harmful are EMF to the body, to the animals, and so on. So I don't know if you remember, but in 2019, 2020, actually the deep COVID time, there was this kind of base station being burned in UK, in Australia, where people were complaining or thinking that the base station were source of all kind of disease, including COVID. This is I don't know if you remember that time, but it was a lot of kind of bad press about EMF radiation and how they can affect our body. So what I was trying to convey there as part of our 5G to 6G evolution, we have to make sure that we are still kind of fulfilling the EMF requirement, because EMF is regulated by ITU, by the World Health Organization. A lot of experiments have been done, and all what is being deployed is going usually through very strict requirement, and we still have, I think, people here from CST. I know here in the kingdom, like there's strong regulation about like the emission levels. Nonetheless, having said that, and that's why maybe I put that point, we need to also be careful that as we evolve in terms of spectrum users, many of these experiments have been done in 2G, 3G context in the lower part of the spectrum. As you move toward the millimeter wave, terahertz, yes, maybe the thermal effect, which is usually the main kind of aspect taken when we consider EMF radiation, like how much heating we can get, you know, by increasing the level of power of the wave, is not maybe the effect that we should monitor. Maybe there are some other biological effects that are triggered by this high frequency, where we need extra experiment, extra validation of basically how healthy are these type of radiations in one hand. And on the other hand, and that's maybe linked to energy efficiency type of design, we need to start thinking also about what we call EMF-aware design. The design of networks that basically deliver the required quality of service, but basically with less EMF radiation. Often very much related to being more energy efficient. So that's a little bit, I mean, in a nutshell, what I meant by that particular bullet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other question from the audience? Okay, so let's continue. We have more 15 minutes. So one of the reasons for 5G, just compare next G with 5G, to not be implemented since the beginning was because it's too costly. So what will be the cost to deploy and to maintain next G, and which strategies can be taken to reduce the costs? Because this is one point which is extremely important. So.
Just one point, if I may, to these health issues,
yes.
Because it came to my mind. The transmitter that the human body is mostly exposed to is not the base station transmitter, but the UE terminal, so your phone transmitter. So the closer your base station is, actually, the better for you, because then your transmitter from the phone transmits with the lowest possible energy. Therefore, I would say the most densified the networks are, the better from the perspective of the exposure to electromagnetic radiation. But now about the cost. Well, I believe in competitiveness. That's the best way to reduce cost. So as we've said already, if we have the market where 80% of the market is in the hands of 3 suppliers, then there is no competitiveness, I would say, or not much competitiveness, especially about RAN, radio access network, because this is a wide area network. You are deploying a network over a larger area with one vendor, so you cannot mix, given the traditional way. You cannot mix. Then any swaps, any type of introductions of new vendor are very costly. And this is what the European operators actually nicely expressed in their report issued after Mobile World Congress in 2023, that they are expecting the wide adoption of Open RAN starting from the mid of decade, not earlier. What is the reason? The reason is that the long-term contracts with traditional vendors are going to expire at that time, more or less. So then there is an opportunity to add more vendors. This is how strong the vendor lock-in is. So I think we could improve the cost figure by introducing more competitiveness. Now, but that's on the business side. Now on the technical side, I am a strong believer of utilizing the resources that are already there as much as possible before asking for new ones. Our networks are designed for the worst case, for the busy hour. That holds for both the spectrum, the channel itself, but also the compute side. The racks with the traditional baseband units or with virtual RAN servers, they are designed for the worst case. So most of the time during the day, nothing happens there, I mean, or not much. Imagine a situation where you are an airliner and you send an airplane with 20% of passenger seats taken, and then you send another airplane with another plane with the same booking. I mean, it's nonsense. But we are doing this with the equipment and with the spectrum, with the precious resources that are there. So before asking for new resources, we should focus on how we can exploit those that we already have. And that will lower the cost.
So currently we are not exploring efficiently the resource.
That is my point, yes.
Okay, so the costs. I agree with Slavomir. Openness, Open RAN is one way to decrease the cost. Why? Okay, so we have this we have O-RAN networks because network operators want to avoid lock-in effects. I mean, 3 network vendors. We need more players, to have more competition, but not only competition, but also more innovation, right, in networks. So that's why the idea is to disaggregate with open interfaces to promote interoperability so that you can exchange, you can mix different modules. This is the theory, right? Okay. So I think that we are not there, right? So this, my experience is that, you need a lot of effort to integrate modules from different vendors, but still, I mean, I think that the technology is still fresh, I mean, new, and we shouldn't expect too much. Maybe AI can help. But what I want to say is the following. There's a danger of new lock-in effects in this context. We are talking about RIC platforms, right? So there is a RIC platform of Nokia, RIC platform, I don't know, of Huawei. Maybe there is no RIC platform from Huawei, but they are not compatible. So if I develop X apps for one RIC platform, this X app cannot run on different RIC platforms. This is my understanding. So I think that there is a danger of new lock-in effects. Maybe you can comment on this. And another thing is Open RAN and open interfaces, if they are open. So you buy a module like DU, it is open O-RAN compatible, but it doesn't mean that data is exposed to the outside world. So it's not like that you have E2 interface and then you would like to run AI algorithm on your RIC that you will get data out of DU. Yeah, so you have open interface, but the information you need, for your applications is not provided via this interface. So this is also something, I think it's not a good development, right? Because, for example, in order to reduce the cost, you also need some kind of customization, especially in the context of vertical industries.
Yes.
And customization is, for example, can be done via X apps and R apps. But these algorithms, they need the information, and the information is not provided. So I think that, I wanted to point out these issues. But in general, I think that this is a good approach, but we have to be careful, and we need this interoperability, and we need, exposure of the data to run AI algorithms, for example, on the RIC.
If I could just fastly refer. So there is an interface under standardization that allows to interoperate XApps with various RICs. True, I do agree with you that RICs are the way that the traditional vendors are trying to behave like Open RAN, because these are the, from their perspective, cheap northern interfaces that they can open up without opening the real stuff down there. So it's a sort of a playing a game. But a word on operators. There may be no operators very soon. They may be replaced by other players that are better in finding locations, selling SIMs, and providing services. There are great neutral host companies in the Saudi, like ASIS, for example, that are providing connectivity to the operators. So they broke up the value chain, and that's the way to, in my opinion, to lower those costs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a last question regarding the frequency allocation assignment. Actually, what we have observed through the years, you are evolving from a single band homogeneous network, then you have a single band heterogeneous and a multi-band. As mentioned, we need to explore efficiently the resource. So we cannot use only one technology, for example, free space optics, or RF, or visible light. And then at the end of the day, you'll be dealing with system using different frequency bands with different technologies to satisfy all the customer using, as much as efficient as possible the resource. So how this can be a reality, or this is it's not possible? What is your opinion? And you have a multi-band, you have operating linked with smart cities, you have different applications, and there is no one-size-fits-all solution. We need to use FSO, we need to use RF, millimeter wave, terahertz. This is if you look forward, this is what is expected in a wireless network. So do you have any comment?
So I think maybe, and you, Daniel, have been quite active for a long time on this concept of cognitive radio and spectrum sharing, a concept that generates a lot of paper but unfortunately never, to my best knowledge, made it to the, to practical deployment. But I think we are at a time now where, yes, it's good to look at millimeter wave, at terahertz and free space optics, maybe for, point-to-point, backhaul type of application or fixed wireless access. But I think this kind of what we call front beach spectrum, the lower part of the spectrum, is still the best spectrum for many access applications. And I think maybe we are at a time where we have to start thinking, let's say, seriously about the paradigm of spectrum sharing, being deployed, being used. And that's one way to use resource more efficiently. And beyond just having a nice theoretical paper on cognitive radio and spectrum sharing, I think we have to move from all that work that has been done, over the last 2 decades or so, have hopefully to start being implemented in practice, because we realize that the lower part of the spectrum actually is very valuable. Yes. And is underused. A lot of, let's say, legacy or entities that own that spectrum are not fully using it.
Yes.
We should have to find a mechanism to incentivize them to allow others to use it while preserving their yes. application. And I think it will still work very well, because a lot of studies are showing that a lot of the part of the spectrum are used in a very inefficient fashion. And if it's start being used for wireless network, maybe we can improve the overall efficiency and eventually the cost of these
yes.
networks.
Yeah. Technically, I would say, if I may, that this problem is solvable or solved, and the name of the solution is software-defined networking. So when we are able to separate the hardware part from the software part, and the hardware part becomes a commodity, really very much commercial off the shelf, like the radio unit. What is a radio unit in Open RAN? It is a dumb transmitter and receiver with a very, very basic functionality on board, very basic. So it should be low cost, simple, yes. and omnipresent. the question, and it's not more complicated than the telephone, the phone itself. Actually, it's less complicated. So I would say we can have as many of such radio units that specialize in certain forms of frequencies all around us at a low cost, because it's a commercial electronics. It's almost a personal electronics. It's not a base station as we understand from the old days, and leave the intelligence to be processed at the servers or at the edge in the cloud, where we have a specialized, or where we have also commercial off-the-shelf stuff shared with other workloads. But that's a general use compute capability. And that's the way, I would say, that's the way to move forward.
Okay, thank you. One question, please.
So, thank you for the good discussion. I think when we talk about this anecdotal evidence for 2, 3, 4, and 5G, one very important thing that is forgotten is that iPhone was invented in 3G. Basically, iPhone in 3G gave us the smartphone, and it was perfected the connectivity for 4G. So if I look into 5G, we didn't get a new device during that, but we got the concept of private networks related to Open RAN or not. And this private networks is kind of having innovation at the infrastructure area, right, compared to before. So I would like to hear from the panelists, 10 years from now, which devices do you see appearing? Are we still going to just use the smartphone, or we are expecting innovation in the in terms of devices?
Thank you very much for the question.
It's $1 million question.
I have no opinion, Peter. I don't know, to be honest.
I'm a network guy, so...
It's not easy.
But I agree that this 5G innovation is on the network side, in a similar way as it was on the terminal side in 3G.
Yeah, Peter, but do you know what is happening here in this device? I mean, because if I talk to network vendors, they don't know much about signal processing and what is going on here on this device.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much all for attending this panel section. I'd like to thank the 3 panelists. Hopefully we have contributed for NextG roadmap. And now you are concluding the panel section, and you go back after the line.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. At 1:45, we'll have very interesting keynote speak, a new class of Open RAN, Liquid RAN. And at 2:30, we'll have another keynote speak. So please don't miss the fantastic speech. For now, we're having our time for prayer and lunch. And if you can give some space for the guests first and the international speakers to join the lunch. And we'll see you at 1:45. Thank you for your time.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good afternoon. I would like to welcome all of you to our afternoon session, where we are going to have 2 interesting talks, one about the ORAN and the other one about digital twins. So I would like to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Slavomir Peter Shrek. He is the CEO and founder of IS Wireless, a provider of mobile networks of the future. He's an expert in wireless communications. And he's going to talk to us today about a study case or development of ORAN, which is called Liquid RAN. So please welcome Dr. Slavomir.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, dear guests, thank you very much for the invitation. to this beautiful place and to this wonderful country. This is my 4th time in the kingdom. I've been there like 2 months ago already, and my first time was like 15 years ago, and the change is really tremendous. And I'm a great fan of visions, and I think that what is explained in Vision 2030 is really a great goal. Human beings need goals, need to be dreamers. I'd like to share some of my thoughts with you that are also a result of dreaming. As I am an entrepreneur, I represent IS Wireless, so in this great research community, we are a tiny, very tiny player that is trying to turn concepts into practice and then into the benefit and make customers happy. The most expensive, vast and vulnerable part of the mobile network is radio access network. That's the part that your phone is connecting to. As an ex-martial artist, I could not find a better quote than this from the famous Miyamoto Musashi. Fixation is the way to death. Fluidity is the way to life. And that's exactly the idea behind the new evolution of Open RAN. We love this direction, but we think that things could be done much better. Yes, this is about radio access network. So, in my talk, I'll introduce very briefly the company so that you know what are my origins, what is my focus basically, and what sort of view I can share with you. Then I'd like to introduce the evolution of Liquid RAN and the concept and how that fits into the 6G path. Many, I would say, of those points that I'm going to share with you have been already addressed in this great forum. Then I'd like to spare a while on EU-funded projects, European Union R&D, because it is a source of innovation for the company of the size like we are. And last, I'd like to conclude indicating the gaps and further steps of the focus of the work and the future as we see it. So what would be the actual evolution of 5G towards 6G? So very briefly, the company itself is around 50 people. So we are a small player. We are developing 5G and 6G technologies to help our customers, primarily mobile network operators, to solve the problem of capacity, of missing capacity. Now we are similar to players such as Mavenir or Rakuten or the big guys, really big guys like Nokia or Ericsson, with the exception that we are the only player, even though we are small, we are the only player that focuses explicitly on extremely efficient use of resources. So we add performance into the system by squeezing as much as possible from the resources that are available there before asking for new resources. And that we see as a source of power that you can change into money, into savings, into capacity, into reliability, into various forms of the performance gains. We've started selling in 2023 after 4 or 5 heavy years of product development that were, by the way, preceded by more than 10 years of research in the area of 5G. This research gave us a lot of ideas for prototypes. And between 2023 and 2024, our CAGR, or CAGR as it is called, is more than 60%. So we are growing. This year we expect to reach our break-even point, primarily selling in Europe, but having engagements in Southeastern Asia like Malaysia and the Philippines, where those capacity problems are very critical because cities there are ultra dense. There is a huge number of people living, plus the difficulty of building the network, building the actual physical base stations is extremely difficult. Okay, so what's the set of the scenery to start with? Well, on one hand, the left-hand side, we see the enormous traffic growth, the exponential traffic growth, with a nice thing that in recent months, like 2 months ago, there was this indication from some of the studies that maybe the traffic stopped growing that fastly. But I don't think it is correct. When you look this rush, golden rush into the AI area, then I would say that there will be even more traffic, because you imagine those queries to the algorithms that reside in the edge. There will be an extra booster for the capacity and for the traffic need. So we are expecting exponential rise. Now, what are we typically focusing at when I talk with customers is that they are like generals willing to fight the battle of the past, but not of the future. The reality of the future is extraordinary by the fact that we expect really a flood of traffic. Now, contemporary networks are not really able to carry this traffic. On the other hand, there are those quality of service requirements and capacity, performance demands imposed by IMT. We've talked about it on the panel, IMT 2020 for 5G, not met entirely. I mean, there are some parameters that are met, but in general, they were not met. Here comes the new set of requirements, IMT 2030 for 6G. I would say, well, with contemporary perception of networks, we may have issues, we may have problems to solve these, to provide this performance. So what's the typical mobile network operator problem, an issue? Well, this is this gap between the rising traffic profile, exponentially rising, and saturating incomes from the networks. They would love to rise their business, I mean the mobile network operators, like the over-the-top players do, the Netflixes and so on, because they have the scalable business, but they don't. They cannot do it. Now, what is the reason for that? Now, we blame business models. We blame the fact that both sides of the trading table are hugely aggregated and concentrated. On one hand, you have a handful of providers. As we said, 80% of the market is dominated by just 3 suppliers. On the other hand, you have a handful of operators, players, big players. And that is the reason of being like in a sort of a clash. Now, something needs to be changed. And I am a fan of the statement of one of the German professors, Gerhard Fettweis, from IEEE Globcom this year in Cape Town, that we need to solve this problem before we move to 6G. Otherwise, there will be no 6G, because nobody will pay any dime for new systems. So what this future should look like, and what we see already somehow as a transition, well, the transition that we foresee as the one that needs to happen and the one that should solve this problem is primarily focused around densification of the network. So with densification of the network, of course, it has some of the problems and issues. They need to be solved. With densification of the network, you, first of all, are able to saturate the area with the classical definition of spectral efficiency, with bits per second per hertz. Per area, per square meter, this is what matters, because we are sharing the resources. Now, actually, from the perspective of capacity, the smaller the cell is, the less people it covers. And that means you will have access to most of the channel, or maybe entire channel. So maybe even in the extreme case, the relation will be 1 phone, 1 user, 1 subscriber per 1 base station. Why not? Only then you can enjoy the entire capacity of a carrier, let it be 100 megahertz carrier, right? Otherwise, you always have to share. Now, sharing has been visible painfully during COVID times. I don't know how it was exactly solved in the Saudi, but in Europe, typically people were staying at their home offices, working remotely, and when everybody trying to work, plus if you add the uplink issues, the network was really in a poor condition. By the way, this is something that we can call a contemporary digital exclusion, even in a very well-developed countries. What we have is that during the rush hour, the busy hour, the capacity is missing. So you cannot, no gigabit per second throughput you have. I live in a suburban city to the capital of Warsaw. I mean, for the European reasons, by European means, this is rather a large city, 2 million people, quite well developed. But in my place, and I have a house that is like 20 meters in parallel to the main road. For a couple of years, there was no possibility to install the fiber. So we were using mobile network connectivity. And that is in the rush hour in the range of fractions of megabits per second. So it's really bad. It's really bad. Yeah, densification means also that not just the locations, the actual access points should be more available, but also the capability to carry the actual workload, the computing. But hey, in parallel to this paradigm shift in the radio, we have the paradigm shift of computing. Everybody wants to have the computing capability closer to the end user, and that's what's called the edge computing, basically. And therefore, why not to note these two facts and think about the radio access network. And radio access network is the most vast, most expensive, most numerous, and most vulnerable part of the network. Why not to move these functionalities of radio access network and share the same computing capabilities as the over-the-top services? Now, this is, of course, a challenge, but this is also an opportunity, the one that may allow to disaggregate further the value chain on the side of the typical service providers, the operators. And that's why I think that there may be a very different role in the near future for the operator. What they really like to do, typically, is to sell SIMs, to sell services, not necessarily to build base stations or acquire sites, because that's a nightmare from their perspective. I was working for T-Mobile for 5 years. Now, we've talked about those driving forces behind densification. I would like to make one point more, that if we look around ourselves, we see a lot of players in the infrastructure domain, not necessarily telco infrastructure, that possess localizations, very often equipped with a power supply, very often with a fiber. That's the perfect player to take a role in the value chain of telco provisioning. The city furnitures, all the lampposts, all the kiosks, potential supermarket chains, they can play a role there, and they do play a role. This is actually what we are seeing in Southeastern Asia, where we are having business right now, but we've seen it in the Saudi, but in the examples of the neutral host companies such as ASIS or Taval, if I remember correctly the name. They do a great job in this area. So why not having as many radio units, provided they are cheap, low cost, low power, and they are omnipresent, as mobile phones? Then, and only then, you can share, or you can enjoy as an individual the whole capacity of a carrier. Well, densification is a natural trend in various aspects, right? It happens everywhere. We want to have the parcel for sending goods closer to us, and this is what happens. We have phones, of course, while some of us probably remember the phone boxes, and we have supermarkets are like 7-Eleven or grocery stores nearby, the distance matters. And I think that this is unavoidable trends, the one with which we should not fight, but the one that we should somehow employ to work for our benefit. Okay, so what would be the radio or the mobile network evolution regarding the functionalities when we compare the classical, let's say, hierarchical approach? And it doesn't matter whether it is typical traditional RAN or contemporary open RAN. By contemporary open RAN, I mean those players that are generally known to represent the open RAN. I call them open 1.0, so the first generation of open RAN. So this is the left-hand side picture. The network infrastructure is, the network architecture is pretty much hierarchical. We go from the top core network that's very often centralized, providing a bottleneck, by the way, going to the base stations, where each protocol stack of a base station is a separate software monolith, is a separate software silo. And silo in which the entity that is managing radio resources, which is scheduler, doesn't communicate with the neighbors. I mean, there are exceptions, there are functionalities, but they are built on top. They are not natural for this system. So we have bottlenecks. So we have issues at the cell edges. SNIR between cells is typically very, very bad. Even with this architecture, Open RAN, as claimed by some of the vendors, the Japanese vendors, was providing 40% of CapEx and OpEx reductions in total because of network automation and a much faster time to operation period, so that they were simply faster to set up. Now let's move to the future, where we think we could remove the bottlenecks and improve the efficiency of resource usage. So first of all, going top down, the traffic needs to be distributed near the end user, hence the need for edge processing and local breakout. That's the functionality as it is called. The edge core will reside also near to the end user. Radio stacks are not silos. So we are not talking about the old small cell business model, even though we are promoting smaller radio zones, smaller radio units, but it's not a small cell, because in a small cell, you did have all and everything, the entire protocol stack ported on the very same piece of equipment, and there was no gain from statistical multiplexing and from sharing. So we have parallel protocol stacks. They can communicate with each other, especially the scheduler is shared among a number of base stations. Now this sharing or commonality that has been risen somehow in ORAN Alliance as a real-time rig, I am pretty sure will reappear in Open RAN Alliance very, very soon. Because only down there in the south, so in a real-time operation, you can control things such as interference. And that's a very powerful concept. Actually, the one that the big players are opposing to touch and open up, because this is where you have a dependency on hardware and a dependency on a single supplier. So a scheduler manages a large number of RUs. Now, what type of RUs we are thinking about? Primarily, very simple, very low power, very low cost RUs that are pre-installed in the infrastructure around us, in buildings, in city furnitures. You can activate them whenever they are necessary, but you don't make a whole project of building them. By the way, installing an RU while you are setting up a building is far cheaper than installing afterwards, for obvious reasons. You skip a lot of work. So a high number of RUs that will be low cost, that will be managed by a common cooperative scheduler, are the solution through densification to provide extreme capacities for the network. Now, the cost issue is also lowered by the fact that we are not using fancy stuff like, accelerators or beamforming. They eat up a lot of energy, by the way. Simple commercial off-the-shelf solutions can be managed and installed by a staff that is qualified to install Wi-Fi. So this setup should be as easy as a Wi-Fi setup. That is what we think is the next step towards disaggregation in Open RAN, and that should lead to savings exceeding 40% regarding not just the CapEx, but also the operational expenditures, the costs, like the energy cost later on. So imagine that we have such a network layer that is, of course, software-based, it's, of course, virtualized, it's open, but to a next degree. Now, I'd like to turn your attention to the transition of the paradigm regarding the network rollout, network deployment. Because this is also a sort of a set of requirements that we need to fulfill to efficiently manage what's already there, the resources that are already there. Now, the near future will be a little bit different. So typically what we have is we have the resources involved in communication process, such as localizations. There are certain topology of the localization. You may have a smaller base station, larger base station, or a site that is indoor, outdoor. You may have a different front haul type. Sometimes it's fiber, sometimes it's something different. You have also a certain bandwidth available in a certain point, X, Y point on your map. Then you also have computing, either edge or cloud or dedicated servers, and spectrum, and there are users needing service. So the problem, the old paradigm problem is given a certain quality of service and knowing what type of network function you want to deploy. Is it a base station? Is it DUCU? Tell me what type of resources, what amount of resources do I need? And here comes the whole knowledge of dimensioning of the servers and of the base stations. And so the result of solving this problem is the amount of resources that are to be installed. As a matter of fact, these resources are over-dimensioned because we are creating the network for the worst case, for the busy hour. And notifying this is very important and powerful because over-dimensioning the resources means that most of the time, these resources are not used. They are underutilized. They are like this example airliner that is filled with 20% of people on board, and there is another plane sent just after that. So we are shifting towards a new paradigm. Also given that there will be edge computing all around us, and there might be new players providing us sites or points where we can connect our base station. The new paradigm is that for a given service and a given resources, as they are, we need to find a network function. Now the question is, how do we shape this network function? In what form are we expressing the network function so that we are solving this problem, so that we are providing network functionality efficiently in first row using the available resources? That's the whole thing. And the answer is in shaping the network functions as granular as possible. That's a further disaggregation of the networking functionality. I'll give you examples in a minute. But imagine that your network function is composed out of tiny elements. Let's call them driplets or capsules. Maybe driplets will be a better solution. They are smaller than DU-CU. They are, of course, smaller than the base station, and they are fully functional. So you provide, they provide connectivity as its small little granule, and you can put them into the buckets of resources, like in this right-hand picture, in a way that they are filling up this bucket completely without wastes. Without wastes. That's the whole point. The other point is that those driplets, when they are poured into the bucket of resources, they are unified. They are liquid. So these are not microservices, by the way, if anyone wants to ask. Those tiny elements are not microservices. Microservices, they do have interfaces for the whole lifetime of being. While here, those interfaces disappear, I would say, because they are melted with each other. And if there is another bucket nearby, you can pour your network functionality nearby. This is a very powerful concept, also from the perspective of network survivability. Because imagine that a network node gets destroyed. There was this question about the flying vehicles, flying machines getting destroyed. If your server gets destroyed, you can pour your network functionality in a fraction of a second elsewhere to nearby resources. That's why liquidity is so powerful. And of course, the classical use, even if it is DU-CU, it is still like putting the frozen blocks of ice into a shaped container. There will be wastes for sure. Now, our goal is to eliminate the wastes. When we look into the sort of a scale of various techniques, and we've talked today already also about techniques that you can use to improve the performance of contemporary systems, we see such that are related to spatial management, so the management of space domain, the location, the frequency, and the infrastructure. And wherever we are, these physical domains we treat as resources. So our goal is to use them efficiently. Now, out of all those techniques, such as the run densification, cell-less architecture, often these methods are called cell-less because, as a matter of fact, they make the cell borders disappear. Interference management, transmission advancements, the MIMO, reuse existing infrastructure, and run slicing, we focus on those red left-hand side because they are the easiest to be implemented. And they do not require that much changes in the specs. So from the business perspective, they are far more practical. And not to remember, just one thought that I would like to share with you is on artificial intelligence and the algorithms. Well, they are, of course, there. They are extremely popular right now. But I would take care with implementing them all around every layer in the communication system, because we can quite easily get trapped in a sort of a black box situation where we need parameters to be taken from the system, but they are not there. In order to have them, you would need to change the specs. So yes, this is a nice concept. You can change the specs, but in the frame of, I don't know, maybe 10 years. So, I mean, it's a nice theoretical idea, I would say. And that holds for the AI application to physical layer, for example. You would need to have another structure of pilots and channels in order to really benefit from the new algorithms. Otherwise, you should use what you have. And that's the philosophy, what we have. Use what we have as much as possible. Now, we have great interfaces where the intelligence could be applied. And they are primarily in run intelligent controllers, so a little bit northern. The challenge is to make them closer to develop the real-time intelligent controller. Now, the benefits are enormous. First of all, solving this problem, and we got into the real-time processing because thanks to real-time processing and control, we can actually solve the cell edge problems of this deteriorated signal to interference and noise ratio. So we could solve the interference problem. That's the one critical thing. Another critical thing is how to decouple your software stack into pieces that could be deployed on this heterogeneous edge infrastructure. Imagine that there is a piece of computer somewhere on the campus. There is like on every lamppost you have a piece of a computer. That will soon be the reality of our networks. So how to shape your network functionality so you can pour it as a liquid into those buckets, containers of resources. This is the challenge. But the benefits are really potentially great. So first of all, by focusing on radio resource management, we can solve the problem of this undelivered promise of 5G. Radio resource management is the sole functionality that allows you to influence quality of service, right? Latencies, reliabilities, capacity. These are those ends, those edges of the triangle, of the 5G triangle, not just the throughput. And that allow you to optimize the use of resources. So that's first thing. Second thing, you can improve what the operators claim to need and what they need, what they are saying in their reports that they need. They need energy efficiency on top of that, and they need extra security. Well, Open RAN, considered to be less secure because it's open, we could turn this feature, this behavior into an advantage. Open, disaggregated, means you have much more tiny elements to observe the threats and react to threats. And if you have fluidity, flexibility like this, you can escape from threats. So is it worse? I would say it's far better. So you can improve reliability, you can improve security, and on top of that, you can provide unmatched savings in terms of costs and the capacity itself. Because even if we use the top rank MIMO, massive MIMO, there is an upper limit on the MIMO layers in the specs that you can create. So it's upper limited. Just an example of potential decomposition on the high picture on the top. You see the protocol layer with those original splits, all the splits, not just one that is on the table right now in Open RAN. The concept behind driplets or capsules, is to decompose the software into tiny elements, let it be each of those sub-layers of the protocol stack that you can later either glue together or adaptively offload to other computing equipments. And here, in this case, they are glued into the classical RU, DU, CU structure. But you may have, of course, other structures, and you can also imagine that in case there is an overload happening, you can scale up to the nearby available nodes. Now, talking about scaling up, and again, getting back to this over-dimensioning, the typical traffic profile is this curvy line over the time. So we have time axis on the x-axis, and on the y we have the traffic line, and this black curve shows the traffic over the night and the day with a busy hour. Now, if you dimension your hardware, your servers on the busy hour, then you need to provide the capacity for the busy hour all the time, which means that at this instance of time, the red bars indicate your waste. This is how much you waste. Energy, capacity, and everything. So by being able to follow, to scale, to move the network itself, not the resources, not to adapt the resources to the network, but to adapt network to the resources, you can dramatically, of course, there might be some over-dimensioning, but a little bit. And this is how you can save on the computing, and this is how you can save on energy. Now, how that can look from the radio perspective, The classical situation that we have by far prevalent in the networks is that the neighboring base stations managed by independent schedulers are serving users. These are those green arrows, but are causing interference to the neighbors. These are the red arrows. And of course, we don't want this, but this is how the 4G and 5G is delivered right now. So we introduced this concept of common scheduler or cooperative scheduler, where a big number of RUs is in the set in a pool of resource management, and we allocate resources cooperatively. So provided you do the allocation, provided that you do not harm any other else, or you are optimizing some figure, some optimization measure. And as a consequence, the capacity of the channel, because every base station, every RU uses the whole carrier, let it be this 100 megahertz, which is wasted, of course, in a classical way, which is indicated by this red part, that can be very much limited. This waste can be limited because we were able to manage interference. Now, why we are able to manage interference to that level? Of course, we need to have this real-time control loop, but also the reason is that we granularized our network functionality into elements that are very tiny. Now, in this case, on the frequency domain, this is the PRB, or a group of PRBs, as many as the spec allow us to do. And we know that frequency domain is selective over 100 megahertz in prevalent majority of cases. So you exploit the natural diversity that the channel is providing to you for your benefit. Do not fight with the nature, exploit the nature for your gain. Okay, so how we've been working on this. As I said at the beginning, the company grew on a lot of research projects, and actually I feel myself somehow rooted to the Dutch research community, because I did the PhD at Delft in the Netherlands, and this concept, the very early concepts were exactly developed there. So later it turned into a team, and the team started to acquire more projects. I just want to tell you about the some of the projects that we have on the table. They are all realized within EU-funded projects, either Horizon Europe or SNSJU. And some of you, of course, I recognize colleagues with whom we work on those projects, know very well what are those projects about and what is the financing structure in EU. Typically, there are a couple of partners. These are collaborative projects, very competitive, meaning that the success rate is low in getting financed. We focus on 6G architecture, ICT, disruptive wireless. The projects themselves, they promote consortia where you have like a balanced set of partners. So both academia, but also SMEs, like we are an SME, and larger industry or research institutions. Typically, the size of a single project is between 4 and 8 million euros. So these are not huge projects. They do allow us to hire like 1 to 2 people typically. But it's already enough for a company like we are to provide concepts, to give, to build prototypes, and also to share our concepts with our partners. So these are just example projects that we are in right now. They are all centered around the elements of the mobile network with the focus on RAN, radio access network, where the most interesting topics for us are those related to disaggregation of radio access network, so the software formulation in a way that it could be deployed in heterogeneous edge computing environment, cell-free, cell-less, but not necessarily massive MIMO. There is also the site. I'm not saying this is a wrong direction. This is a very interesting direction, but still needing work on the spec side. So we are going for a simpler version of that. The cell-free that reuses frequency without the necessity to have massive MIMO. The one that exploits multi-user diversity, the selectivity that I've talked to you before. And, well, optical wireless is there, of course. Security is very much important nowadays for various reasons. We live in uncertain times, so to say, especially I am Polish, and we are based in Poland, so we feel the conflict on the border and so behind the border, and that shapes also the perspective. Okay, so to wrap up the needs and the challenges. For the needs, the philosophy that we have is, as I said, to use as much as possible what the nature offers to us. Therefore, we would strive for those solutions that require as little changes into the specs as possible. Only here and there improve some of the stuff and build intelligence on top of that. So the control actions, removal of borders, like, you know, when we have cells, you remove the problem at the cell edges that we talked about. But if you have a group of cells, then you will have yet another group of cells, and there will be a border ultimately as well. So we would like to remove it as well. And how to work with so vast set of potential computing nodes. We know that there are various network processor architectures. There is this notion of accelerators. How would it happen? Will they really get adopted or not? And within this, we rather think that commercial off-the-shelf solutions for computing will be far more prevalent than those that are focused at a certain, let's say, producer, because we don't want to have the vendor lock-in anymore. That's the prevalent thing. And for the challenges, the practical prototyping of mechanisms, the front haul is a diverse topic. Fiber is not available everywhere. And last but not least, real-time rig. We are just starting a big project on development real-time rig, and we believe that it will be part of Open RAN Alliance again, because it has been a part of that already. Liquid RAN works on simple, unified computing and radio units. This computing can also carry other applications. The goal here is to have ease of deployment, and this ease of deployment is responsible for massive penetration. The problem of capacity is solved by densification, not the size of a single unit. Isn't it a bit similar to the evolution of cameras that we observed? Let me make this analogy. Long time ago, we did have analog cameras, the classical, you know, with optics and with the film. They were giving perfect pictures. They were great. They were pretty expensive. They are sort of similar to traditional closed radio access networks. They are optimized for a purpose, but they don't have elements that you can share with other workloads and other applications. So what appeared later was a digitization of those cameras. You still have optical part, which is pretty much large, but the sensor is digital. Can you use this new digital camera to do any other tasks or to be present? No, it was just a digital camera, but it was already virtualized, right? Yes, this is similar to virtual RAN or the contemporary Open RAN. It is a step forward, but it's not yet a solution. So what is the solution for making pictures? By far the prevalent one. These are the phones. Can they carry some other tasks? Yes, of course. Why they are popular? Because they are everywhere. Are they the perfect thing to do perfect? Are they the best tools to make the best pictures? No, probably the analog are still better, but they are by far more numerous, more prevalent. And why? Because they are cheap, they are everywhere. And we think that will be the future of liquid run. So thank you very much for my time, for invitation, and I'm there to take any of your questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Slawomir. So now we are going to open the floor for any questions. Go ahead, please.
So thank you, Slawomir. So if I look into this figure that you had with competitive versus cooperative approach, so it reminds me a little bit of this coordinated multi-point network MIMO and so on. The main problem there was always the coordination of resources and the overhead and so on. So in your case, you have this liquid thing, which means that orchestration of these resources is an issue. But orchestration will be an issue. I mean, the overhead of controlling them all.
Yes, unless you make them kind of manageable. So you somehow propagate the algorithms in a distributed manner, so they can be executed down there.
Okay. The key difference I see from comp is here that you're pulling both communication and computing resources.
Here.
Yes. Here.
Yes, exactly. And you acknowledge that everything will happen probably at the very same physical node.
Yes, I will talk about that tomorrow.
That was not the game, that was not available before. Therefore, comp is, well, the concept is nice, but it was not prevalently adopted.
No, mostly because of the overhead. So here, if you're pulling the resources and solving the overhead problem, then
you solve two problems at the same. You shoot two gooses at the same shot.
Yes.
Okay, any other questions? Go ahead, please.
I have to say that there are examples of successful open systems, but there are also examples of successful closed systems. Nah? Sure. The one I have in hand.
Absolutely.
MacBook Air, right? Yeah. So I don't know whether you can, draw this analogy between cameras and mobile systems. I don't know. I mean, I think that there are many factors. Maybe they are even out of our control that determine, the success of some technologies or not, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. But I would say that your system, if I can see an Apple on the back cover, is an open system as well. Without an open market for the apps, it would not be the success story, I think. So openness is there, controlled, and I think this is what the Ericssons and Nokias are trying to do. They are trying to open, but in a very controlled way, keeping their hand on the most valuable part. But I think that the whole other nature is unstoppable, and it will go to build modular stuff, and I would say far more modular than we think right now. They can live in parallel, no worries. I mean, you do have PCs as well, right? So the point is we have chosen this for obvious reasons.
So then I have different definition of openness, because for me, openness means interoperability. So when I was young, I was building computers, I bought, I go to a store and bought these components and built a computer for myself.
But I do agree with you. Openness is interoperability.
Yeah, but this computer is closed. I cannot do here anything, right? In this sense. I understand what you mean.
Are you buying apps only from
No,
them?
apps, okay.
Then you see, it's not completely closed.
But I mean hardware, no? Hardware that is, here built in.
But hardware, I think, will be less and less important because it is costly and because the economics of scale are needed to draw the price of the hardware down. This is my point.
Okay, this is another topic.
Yeah.
But I don't think
Thank you very much. So, any other questions? It's okay. Let me ask one question. What kind of changes to the current infrastructure of the current network do we need if we want to move to ORAN? Or so, is there any changes to the current infrastructure needed by the companies?
Not necessarily, I would say, because most of the ORAN networks that are built right now, they are fully 5G standalone networks, and they are the overlay to the existing networks. And even the big ones are greenfield operations. So I think that the changes would be required if we start to mix up the ORAN with the existing RAN, so creating a sort of a brownfield deployment. But as long as we are complying with the interfaces, those changes should not be painful, should not, I mean, they should be seamless. And I believe in such a future for ORAN.
Thank you very much. So let's thank Dr. Slawomir very much for this interesting talk.
Thank you very much.
Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Michael Dioden from Keysight Technology. He's the director of Keysight Technologies in Belgium, and he's the director of the 6G group. He's going to talk to us about digital twins. So please welcome Dr. Michael.
Thank you very much. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So yeah, I'm Michael. I'll talk to you about digital twin. That was what was the topic for today. And I'll also draw paradigm with some of the presentation you have seen up to now. So maybe if we can get, so the title is about NextG. So I removed 6G. I generalized to NextG to try to fit the format here. But we're talking about experimentation, and we will be going from KPI definition to validation in digital twin. So digital twin being the central topic for the day. And we'll also talk about real-life network, because digital twin as such, some people think it's just a simulation. Well, we have a different opinion on that, so let's talk about that. So from this title, I'll just keep a few keywords, and these keywords are in fact the agenda that I will be covering. So we're going from KPI, we'll go to digital twin, life network, and validation, okay? So let's start with the journey. KPIs. So we have seen that in different presentations up to now. And what I like to do is to look back at history to understand where we're going. So if we look at 5G, there was in Europe, because we're coming from Europe at our end, we had quite a lot of trial sites that were supported and sponsored by the 5G PPP at that time. They have been doing a lot of trials, a lot of use cases. We have been hearing that throughout the day. And out of that, they define a set of KPIs. Okay, and that was basically something that was looked at that time as being the starting point. Now, going towards 6G, right, we look again at the KPIs. This is an exercise that's going on right now as we speak in what we call the TMV. This is the SNSJU, the next generation research framework in Europe. And what you see in red are basically the new or different KPIs compared to 5G. So they were not really emphasized back in the day of 5G. AEMF was, I would say that's the only one where basically there has always been, of course, some sensitivity. But you definitely see AI, ML, there were some aspects of mobility that are different, the compute and so on that are coming as new KPIs. So these are basically the new things. Some of the other KPIs have been aggregated into larger category. That's what you can see on the upper side. Now, where do we end, or where do we go with next G, right? And again, looking back, I love this diagram coming back from one of the handset vendor back in 2020. That was a good example of what they predict would be. Keep that in your pocket, because in 2030, we'll be able to compare if we're there. From that 2020, basically, you have seen the wheel in the meantime coming from ITU as well, right? So that is the next stage that was published in December 2023. And one of the speakers was alluding to the next step, which is really an important milestone from the 3GPP community, which is the workshop in March, right? Where a lot of presentation will happen, and hopefully out of that we'll start to get clarity on what are the plans for 6G. So if you ask me today, well, let's look what March will say. March will be an important milestone to define what's coming. Now, that's basically for the KPI part. That's just to setting the scenes. And now, how does the KPI relate to digital twin, and how basically digital twin comes in? So a first general slide to explain digital twin, because not everybody might be familiar with the concept. We're not talking about pure simulation, and you will see that digital twin is more than just a simulator, okay? There is a simulation portion, yes, definitely, okay? But there's also an emulation portion, which is not something you would see in a simulator. We're also looking really at a dynamic system. So this is not a kind of fixed box that doesn't change. There are evolutions, there are updates that you will need to do. You will need to maintain it to make sure that the digital twin continue to operate as you would like to. And we'll see that this is in fact part of the challenge. You need to make sure that you can go from system level, total picture, to maybe individual elements into your system. So you want to be able to freely navigate from top level to down into the details. And that you have a way to basically scale the system, because something that has happening into a certain element may have an influence on the total system, or will have an influence. And the only way for you to look at that is to basically navigate through these layers. You may need to combine digital twin with other digital twins. So you will see that you have different digital twins. You can have a digital twin in a medical environment. You can have a digital twin in a telecom environment, in a mechanical environment. These are all digital twins. They are not automatically talking to each other. And the way we use it is to, amongst other, to validate components, to understand basically the performance, how the performance of a component will influence the system. We're also using digital twin to create data sets. So we've been talking about AI a few times. AI is potentially not a super new technology, but you need data to train the AI so that the AI basically perform its operation. And you need to get the data from somewhere. Well, digital twin is one of the potential sources of data. And operators are looking at using digital twin for managing their system. So I think we had a very good example of network densification. It's a very good concept, but it's indeed complex to put in place. You will not be able to just sitting behind your PC and change a parameter on the fly. There will be some systems that are looking at basically what is the optimum configuration. So there will be a need for computation behind to take decisions. And when you look at digital twin, you're combining, in fact, multiple aspects. You're looking at the terrain, you're looking at the buildings, the weather. All these type of elements may be parts of your digital twin that you integrate together. And all that together makes your twin. And you have to define what's in and what's out of your twin. Now, looking at the telecom digital twin, so this is one of the solutions we're having. This is really, I would say, a network digital twin. This is focusing on telecommunication network. You can do quite a lot with this. So you can, for example, replay cyber attack on your network. And if your digital twin is properly done, you will be able to look at how the network behaves against a cyber attack. That could be one of the scenarios you want to play. You may want to look at mobility. So how basically my network behaves when my users are moving around. You know these mass events where you have a lot of cell phones together into a certain confined space have an impact, for example, on network. How would my network performance behave under such condition? These are type of scenarios you can look and you can play and run and verify basically in digital twin. Now, this goes from physical layer, when we're talking about modulation, propagation, up to protocols, up to application layer, right? So this is going through the complete stack up to the application layer where you try to understand basically how the overall system works. And the digital twin here in this case is divided like the OC layer in different elements and components that you can basically interconnect. So why is this important? Why is digital twin important? Well, one of the things coming back to the KPIs, this is a way to look at how basically the KPI may evolve based on certain technology. So you can try to study and understand if the technology that is in your digital twin will be able to reach the expected KPIs. We have been talking here also during the panel, did we, yes or not, meet basically the minimum KPIs? Well, these are the type of things you can try to look into from a digital twin perspective. I mentioned as well using digital twin as a way to train an AI system. You are able to basically get data out of a digital twin that can basically be used for training your AI system. I'll give you an example so that you see how we basically do that. The operators, they want to optimize the network, right? So they will need to make decisions where I put certain resources. Do I aggregate certain function? Do I basically put them into the edge? All these type of discussions, all these type of questions you need to be able to study. And then one of the last thing is that when you discuss with operators, the vision or the expectation from digital twin is that this will be a replica of the network. And that's where the scale start to really play a role, right? You're looking at very large area, very large environment, very large network. And this is really where they would like to have these systems to validate the overall performance, basically, of the system. So they want to be able to do that. So this was basically the original vision of the digital twin that you have from the ITU. So there is a paper on that if you want to read. There's more information there. This was a recommendation there. Now, can you just use it? I mean, I buy a digital twin. Can I just start using it? Well, yeah, maybe no. Okay, so it's not that straightforward, unfortunately. We believe that this is something where you need to be very careful with. So one of the reasons that we are investing in that digital twin is because we want to make sure that you have a way to have a proper and correct response of a digital twin. What we mean by this is if you expect the system to behave in a certain way, you need to be sure that the response you're getting is in line with what the actual system would do. You need to basically be sure you have a high fidelity. And that is something we believe we can achieve through measurements. So we are connecting the digital twin story to a measurement story, where we say we need to measure the different elements. It's good to have a model of something, but a measurement-based model is even better because you have measured the actual response of the system. You're not just looking at a simulator. And that is where we are really deviating from a simulator. MATLAB could be a digital twin, but MATLAB models is as good as the model you have made inside. If you measure the model, you have the actual response. Another aspect that differentiates from simulators is that you need to implement the 3GPP interfaces. You need to make sure that if you have a digital twin, inside the digital twin you have dedicated interfaces so that you can swap out blocks of technology. I'll give you an example where we are removing part of an ORAN element where you have known interface and you put basically another active element into it. Respecting the interface means that you have the ability to compare and to play with and to replace elements. And then the last point is the scalability, which is really you need to make a trade-off between accuracy on one hand and probably size of the simulation. You don't want to talk about one bit in a total huge system. You want to have the global picture, so that needs to go faster with potentially a bit less accuracy, and you want to be able to trade off with very precise, accurate analysis for specific details points. Good. Let's start the journey. So we're taking an ORAN as an example because that's how we are currently playing with digital twin internally. And what we're doing is we have a three-step approach. First of all, on the left side, we have a system under test. So in this case, we're taking an ORU, which is the radio front end of the ORAN, the hardware. We want to measure that. Out of that measurement, we are creating a high-fidelity model of that hardware. Because we have measured the parameters, we are able to put that into a model. And that model can be then consumed inside the digital twin. So again, all the elements on the right on the black can be a model, can be something that you have measured in a previous life or in a previous campaign. But here in this case, we take the URU, we measure the URU, we create a model, and we drop this measured model inside the digital twin. So we are at least sure that the ORU is acting according to the real-life component, because we have measured that. Now, this is the concept, this is the high-level principle, and we have done that. We have taken some commercial ORU, here in this case a Lighton. We are measuring basically these elements, and we are creating a model. Now, unfortunately, again, this is not that easy. And the pointer is stuck, okay. So if you look at how this works, the ORU is in fact connected to quite a lot of additional functionality. So you need to be able to do what we would call a wraparound test. You need to put the ORU into his environment so that he see the same information as we would see in the real life environment. The creation of the model, that's something you can do. You can decide what are the key parameters that you focus on. You can extract these parameters, you can focus on that. But between the model and the consumer digital twin, you will need to do some intelligent steps to ensure that the model basically works into the system. Simply because you cannot measure everything from the ORU. You will have to reduce the quantity of parameters you're measuring, okay? And that is where this intelligence basically comes in, and that's where we can add value as well. We can do also the same on the OCU and the ODU. So we just did a model now on the ORU. This is, for example, same story, but looking at the CU and the DU, which are the companion in an O-RAN perspective to your network. And what you can see is very similar type of story. We can do that with the CU and the DU. This is an example of measurements when we start looking at the CU and DU. So what are we doing? We're creating test scenarios where we say, look, we want to measure at these different bandwidths, which are the operating bandwidths of my system. I want to look at the quantity of MIMO layers, for example, the number of users, because an ORU with 1 user or an ORU with 10 users will have different behavior, and so on and so on. And what you start to do is you basically create a lot of measurements. You're measuring the actual behavior of the OCU and ODU. In this case, we take them aggregated, and we're getting that information. Out of that, we can create models. Another example now, I've done my OCU, I've done my ODU, ORU. I'm doing the same with the UE, and I will show you a few screenshots so that you understand the process. Same principle, the device under test, as we call it, the dot here is the UE. The UE face a test equipment where we have defined campaigns, where we know the type of measurements we want to do to extract the information from the UE. We are automating all of that to make sure that you're not testing parameters by parameter yourself. We are aligning all the information we have from the measurement system. So for example, the state of the protocol, and at the state of the protocol, we know exactly how many milliwatts, for example, or microwatt were consumed by the device under test, here in the case the mobile. So we can look at, okay, look, the mobile was transmitting, this is the amount of energy that transmission cost. The mobile was idle, this is the amount of energy that cost when you are having a mobile in hands. So you're getting really information on a per message basis. You know exactly what basically the device does and consuming energy in this case for that exact state. Once you're starting to have that, you start to in fact realize that if you really want to do a full model of a UE, you have again a very large quantity of parameters, and of course you want to do a swipe about all the parameters, and you're getting to a huge quantity of measurements. For a UE, in our case, we came to the conclusion that this is about 1 year of measurements, which is not really realistic. So that is an estimation of the time it would take to fully characterize the phone. So out of that, we are clearly finding shortcuts. We are basically pruning the quantity of measurements to get to something that we can measure in about an hour or 2. That's really a much more acceptable timeline. So after 2 hours of measurements, we have a huge data set. The data set gives us the exact amount of energy you consume against certain states. And what we can do is do a model that predicts, in fact, the power consumption of the UE when you are deploying it. We're also verifying, so we're training an AI-based model out of these measurements. And with this, we are also correct and verifying basically that the model predicts actually the behavior of the UE in the case of certain scenario. And we are capturing that and we are verifying that in the system. So we are now having a UE, an AI-based model that represents the actual set of measurements from your UE. And that is the piece you can drop in your digital twin. So we're putting that now in the digital twin. This was a demo at Mobile World Congress 2 years ago, where we are actually putting on the left side, the UE in Barcelona. And there are two UEs. On the right side, what you see are the dashboards of the UE, where you have an idea about how much energy you still have on the battery of the UE. And we have scenario where these phones, one is fixed in Barcelona, the other one moves around in Barcelona. And what we're looking at this graph is to see how fast basically the energy is depleted on the phone so that we can predict, for example, the lifetime of device. Imagine that this would be an IoT device. We can predict how long the IoT device would be working in the field, okay? For the video, we took extremely small batteries for the cell phones. That's why it's depleting so fast, but just that you understand the principle. So that's digital twin. So I think we understand now that you have these measurements, the modeling, that you can bring that into digital twin, understand the actual response for what you are interested for. It can be energy, can be performance, can be security, depends on what you measure, right? We're not doing everything at the same time. But now, how does this relate to life network? And that is basically the next step, and that's what we're doing these days. In Spain, south of Spain, city of Malaga, we basically have in Malaga a testbed. This is a life network located just behind the port. So if you have ever been to Malaga, there is a street called Calle Larios, and there is a big square, which is really downtown, the old town of Malaga, where you have really a lot of people. This environment is in fact a 5G private network. It's a network we, together with the University of Malaga and Telefónica, fully control. We have access to the base station, we have access to all the parameters. We can put 1,500 users on the network. We have eSIM provision. And this is in fact the place you are. So this is really downtown, heart of Malaga. If you go, you will do shopping, most probably. When I go, I look at base stations, okay? But this is how it looks like. This is the street that you have there. Next to this location, if we go to the left of Malaga, we have another location, which is the university campus. And at the university campus, we have two networks that are deployed. On the left, we have around the Ada Byron, where we have the core network of the overall network for this testbed. And on the right side, the Telecommunication Institute, where there is also an environment where we have a deployment. These deployments are controlled, and out of these deployments, we have created digital twins. Back to my city center, the blue dots you see are base stations, active base stations. And what you can see on the building, so this is Massimo Dutti, a shop where you have clothes and so on. What you see is that you have a set of base stations, okay? This, in fact, is throughout the city center, the active life network. Now, we have completely characterized this environment. We have a digital twin of this environment, as I mentioned for the other two. So we know the response, we know the parameters. We have characterized that for FR1 and FR2, so we can also support FR2 technology. And we are using this digital twin and these testbeds to, in fact, validate current technology performance, but also to look at next generation technologies. We try to predict what the technology will be doing, and we try to also deploy the technology whenever it's available to verify if the digital twin was properly predicting the technology improvements or contribution to the KPIs. So from the live network, I will show you now a bit of validation. So validation starts with real life measurements. This is real, no digital twin. You need to really measure your network. The blue lanes are basically what you see where we are doing actually a measurement. So we have been having really, you could call it drive test or walk test in this case, people really around with spectrum analyzer, with NEMO, which is a tool to analyze basically the network. And you are capturing a lot of data points to understand the performance of the system in a given configuration. You redo with different configurations and so on and so on. So we have done that. That data set is available. We did that for indoor, inside the building. We did that for outdoor on the campus, okay? For both FR1 and FR2. So there's an FR2 deployment on the campus. And what you can see are the type of drive tests where you capture basically with a scanner quite a lot of information, okay? We have done that as well for the city center. This is an example of the RSRP measurements that we're doing in the city center. That one requires police acceptance because you're in the middle of the city center with a lot of tourists and they watch you, what are you doing here with strange equipment? They're not all engineers, the one doing shopping there. And then from there, you start to build up basically your digital twin. So we have the measurements, we know exactly where we are measuring what, and you can compare that to the digital twin and adjust, in fact, now the prediction of digital twin to the actual performance. And the first time we did that without any tweak or any play, we basically started to see, look, we have, in fact, some delta between what the digital twin is predicting and what we are actually measuring. Of course, at the beginning, the first time, maybe not all the parameters are taken into account, maybe not all the aspects have been taken into account. So that means, yeah, you have a delta, you have a difference. So that's where the point comes from, yeah, you can use a digital twin, but it's not just out of the box. You need to know what you do, you need to think about it, because otherwise you may get a different answer than what you're expecting. So we started with this, that's how we basically did. And from here, we did the same with the city center. We also had some gaps before any further intelligent thinking of what we're doing. You basically see the red one, and then you start saying, okay, is it just an offset? You can offset, and then you start to see, well, the measurements start to be not that far away from basically the prediction. So you start to think, okay, is this just an offset somewhere? Is the power level, for example, of the base station maybe not 100% correct? These are the kind of things you can ask yourself. So we still need to improve that, and that's really where we kick in. One of the first steps we did was to add ray tracing capability inside the digital twin. So the first one was using statistical channel model, the 3GPP channel model, which are okay. But now basically you can, in fact, take into account the 3D structure of the buildings. You can start to add ray tracing and understand, okay, look, because of this surface there, which is the next step, you're adding surface information. You can basically take into account actual reflection and so on. And that's how you start to basically diminish the delta between the actual measurements that you have and the digital twin prediction. So we intend to really bring that together up to a level where the answer that we're getting for the digital twin is precise enough to answer the question that you're asking. And that measurement precision is very important. So that's for the validation. Now, I'm adding an extra small topic because I talked about validation, but you still say, what do you do with it, right? Well, let's just look at two use cases, very simple, on how we basically use the technology we have to predict the next generation performance. And the first topic we look at is reflective intelligent surfaces. So there are a few posters on RIS. So RIS is a topic known here in the university. When we started working on RIS, that was in parallel to the digital twin, we said, look, I would like to take a RIS and deploy it in the live network to understand how it works. Then you connect with a few vendors and you look, you get data sheets, you get information from university, and none of them basically have a data sheet that you can compare. So the first step even to put into the digital twin was to say, okay, look, we need to find a proper way to measure the risks, because there are multiple methods on how to measure and characterize the risks. So what we are doing in parallel at ETSI is to basically we have a work item looking at how to properly measure and characterize risks. That is going on now. There is a meeting this week at ETSI again, where we're continuing to define basically the measurement methodology for characterizing a risk. And that will create us a data sheet. That will give us information on how the risks perform. So I can take basically these measurements and I can put a model in the digital twin, which is what we're doing. So we are running these measurements currently with about 10 risks for the moment. We are doing this measurement campaign, and from here we go to deploying the risks in the city center. So RF measurements in an echoic chamber, and then now we're going, in fact, in February, second week of February in Malaga. If you're around, you will see people installing RIS and will do actual measurements back into our network. And here we will be looking at using the RIS in the network on one of the big square. So there is Plaza de la Constitución, the Constitution Place, which has two very interesting locations where you have a kind of passage, which are between buildings, small street. This is a picture of it. So it is not actually, you're not entering the building. This is actually a public street, but it is enclosed within the building. And I think you all understand that if you have an FR1 base station, that might be a challenging environment because of the walls and everything. But if you have an FR2 base station, that's even worse. There will be no signal except if you're in a line of sight for such type of system. Problem, there is a very nice tree in front of it. There is also a metal kiosk in front of it. So good luck to have FR2 coverage from the square inside. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. So we are in digital twin, discussing virtually, where do we put the base station? Where do we put the risks? We know the base station performance. We know the risk performance because we have measured it. We put that into digital twin and we try to see what comes out. Out of that, we'll be selecting a few positions and we'll actually deploy that. And once we're deploying that, we hope that we have coverage inside that street. That is something we're doing in February. So if you're at Mobile World Congress, come and see me, I'll show you the results. We're doing that, of course, with partners, risk vendors, because we are not developing risk ourselves, right? And some research institutes. We have a collaboration with ITRI, which is a research center in Taiwan. YT Tech, Timitech, and Greener Wave are participating. Their risk is basically used in the trial. And we'll be able also to compare. That's one example for the risk. I did add one today, based on the discussion earlier today about high-altitude platform. So what you see here is the other building from the telecommunication outside of the city center. And we are playing, in fact, scenarios in the digital twin. So, of course, the UI is still, I would say, not at the level you would like. It's not beautiful yet. It's coming. But the functionality is there, and that is more important. So the scenario is on the bottom below. You see a couple of phones. These are students at the university. We have a base station on the right, and the base station fails. There is a problem with the amplifier. The energy of the base station goes down, and these users are losing connectivity. And what the vision is that the high-altitude platforms is in fact sent to the location to pick up the signal because the base station has failed. So you see the high-altitude platforms moving in. Here, in this case, it's a drone, so we're not talking 20,000 meters, we're talking much lower. And the drone basically starts to go for connectivity to these students that need connectivity. And one of them will now decide to go to the library, and the library is in fact very close to the base station. So you will see that the UE will start moving and going basically to the base station. The question is, the base station is still active, even if it's a lower power. So at a certain point in time, you will basically disconnect from the hubs and start connecting to the base station. So you see these green arrows popping up. This means that, hey, I have again detected my base station, I'm going back to connect to the base station. And now the student is done the library, he's coming back to the university. So when does he do the handover? Back from the base station to the high altitude platform. The high altitude platform can be a drone, can be something at 20 kilometers, can be a satellite. We can basically replace them. We can take into account the channel, the propagation, the performance. You can put the level of signals you get and play this type of scenario. So this is basically what we mean with a digital twin in telecom. And from this, you can play and here assess the impact of a high-altitude platform. That's basically it. So as a takeaway, digital twin has a lot of potential, and it is considered an important technology for the next G, right? That is clear. It's used for AI data generation. I think I showed you as an example. We're also looking at this for AI validation, was mentioned as an important problem. This is really a very crucial problem. The calibration and the accuracy of the twin is definitely the challenge, the core challenge. It has to be real time, because if it's extremely slow, it's useless, right? You need to play scenarios, you need to assess how fast, how good things are. You need to scale. So right now I'm showing you part of the city. If we have to deploy this on the complete city, that requires additional technology to make sure that the thing still runs. So there is a scaling issue as well with this. And then you need to be able to connect twins to other twins. So here we're purely about telecom. We have a kind of IP level input and output, and this IP needs to go to an application. So if I'm a doctor and have a medical twin, that's where we somehow have an interconnect between the telecom twin with the medical twin. And can be other type of twins as well, depending on where you connect. If you want more information, the trial, the pictures, what we're doing is coming indeed from a EU project. Slavomir was mentioning it, a 6G sandbox. So that is basically public information, so you can look at it. And we also have other environments. I didn't mention it. We're still working on that, but we also have, for example, a racetrack where we can play with intelligent driving, with autonomous driving. There is a 5G network deployed there. We have also farming environment where we can do digital twin of farming. So if you want to play with tractors or intelligent crops, watering system, there is an environment for that, okay? And of course the city center. And this is a picture with the robot dog, which is, I think, pretty known to everybody. The police is using this as part of their experimentation in the city center. So we have basically actually use case for the robot dog there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Michael. Now let's open the floor for any questions.
Thank you for a very informative presentation, very nice presentation. We had a presentation before from a person from Keysight, and there was, I think, a very healthy, good discussion about the term, or the use of term digital twin. Because we had this HTZ softwares and wireless mobile softwares. We will have the buildings, topology. So the point is, can we still call it digital twin? And from our side, we're thinking that unless it is real life, which means that you make a scenario, but the data or the modeling is keep refreshed and updated. Otherwise, it will be just like emulation or simulation software that we had before. If you want to comment on that.
Yeah, so I think I was mentioning simulation versus digital twin. So we have the ability to connect also to real equipment, right? So to see how the equipment perform, that is, I would say, part of the mission of a digital twin. You need to be able to do that. You need to be able to also, of course, update the models to make sure that they're accurate, because a software version, for example, a firmware version of an equipment, if it changed, may change basically the performance, meaning that you have to recharacterize, redoing a measurement, right? So that is, for me, the big difference between a simulator, which is more static, and a digital twin.
Okay, any other questions?
Can digital twin be used to create a campus map, virtual 3D tour, which can accurately represent various layers and different?
Yeah, so we are building 3D maps from the campus and from the city center. You can buy these maps, you can import these maps, but in our case, for the campus, we had to create our own maps. So we are basically looking for companies who are basically specialized in making 3D maps, and we buy these maps, yes. So the tool, the telecom tool as such, consume the map. It's not generating the map.
Okay. We have time, one more question. Let me ask again, back to Dr. Ali's question. Like in the digital twin that you have, do you have live update of the data of the environment around? Because like a car passing by may change the complete measurements, right?
Yeah.
So if we don't have this live update, maybe this will cause that
Yeah.
like a discrepancy between...
Yeah, definitely. So when you do live measurements, you're not just doing one measurement. You will need to do a couple of times. You're fully correct. If there is a car in the street, now this is a pedestrian street, that's changed continuously, the environment. So there is no way that with just one pass you are capturing the actual truth.
Yes.
So there will be always some statistics that you have to apply to your data set. Now the statistics should be representative for the deviation you have of that environment. And again, you try to be as precise as possible. But the case of the car or a truck passing by blocking the signal is completely correct. So,
yeah.
So there is no, currently we have not deployed live probes that are feeding back the digital twin on a continuous basis. This is not something, we're not there at that stage yet. I fully agree with you that, for example, when you look at an operator who would use a digital twin and deploy, the techniques exist. You are deploying actually endpoints in the network who are on a continuous basis, for example, consuming YouTube, and you verify the KPI of that YouTube. These are technology we already have, but we have not connected that technology yet with the digital twin. That is work for future.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank Dr. Michael, and please, let's thank him. Thank you. Thank you all for attending today, would you like?
Yeah, thank you very much, Doctor, for sharing the session. I will just would like to thank you for this, for your time and attendance, and we plan to see you tomorrow. So tomorrow at 8 will be the breakfast and again registration, and the session will start at 9. Tonight we'll have dinner with the guests, so we'll give them some time to relax. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.